We found someone who can do your job for 30 of your salary, my wife's brother, the boss, said after 13 years. I packed my things without a word. 1 hour later, my phone kept ringing. It was the CEO. "Where are you? We have the quarterly review," he demanded. My boss didn't know the CEO and I. The fluorescent lights hummed above me like a swarm of mechanical bees, each flicker a tiny countdown to something I couldn't yet name. I'd been sitting in conference room C for 20 minutes, watching dust particles drift through the slant of afternoon sunlight that cut across the table like a blade. Outside, September rain tapped against the windows in Morse code I'd stopped trying to translate years ago. 13 years. That's how long I'd been walking these halls. How long I'd been arriving before dawn and leaving after dark. How long I'd been building something I believed mattered. 13 years of missed birthdays and cold dinners and promises to my kids that next week will be different. 13 years of watching my wife, Elena, smile less and less when I finally made it home. The door opened without ceremony. No knock, no warning. Just Mark striding in with that particular blend of confidence and discomfort that men wear when they're about to ruin someone's life and call it business. Mark, my brother-in-law, Elena's older brother, the one who'd given me this job back when I was scrambling to provide for a pregnant wife and a mortgage that seemed to grow larger every month we couldn't quite pay it. He didn't sit. That should have been my first real clue, but hindsight is just another word for the clarity that comes too late. "David," he said, and my name sounded wrong in his mouth. Too formal, too careful, like he was testing out a word in a foreign language he'd only read in books. I waited. 13 years in corporate America had taught me that silence is often the only power you have left when everything else has been stripped away. We've been reviewing the department's performance metrics. He placed a manila folder on the table between us, but didn't push it toward me. Just left it there. Neutral ground, like a ceasefire agreement neither side actually wants to sign. The numbers are, they're solid. You've done good work. Past tense. I caught it like you catch the scent of smoke before you see the fire. But the landscape is changing, he continued, finally sitting down, but on the edge of the chair, ready to leave, ready to be anywhere but here. We have to stay competitive. We have to think about sustainability and long-term viability and, Mark, I said his name the way you say someone's name when you want them to stop pretending and just tell you the truth. What's this about? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face like lightning behind clouds. But then it was gone, replaced by the mask we all wear when we have to do things we've convinced ourselves are necessary. We found someone who can do your job for 30% of your salary. The words landed between us like stones dropped in still water, and I watched the ripples spread outward, touching everything, changing everything. The fluorescent lights kept humming. The rain kept falling. The dust kept drifting through that blade of sunlight. But everything had shifted, tilted, transformed into something else entirely. 30%, not 29, not 31, 30 exactly. Like they'd calculated it down to the decimal point, like my value could be measured and weighed and found wanting by someone with a spreadsheet and a mandate to cut costs. I didn't ask who. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask if 13 years meant anything, if family meant anything, if the countless nights I'd saved his projects and covered his mistakes and made him look good to the people above him meant anything at all. Instead, I stood up. Slowly, deliberately, the way you stand when you've just realized that the ground beneath your feet has always been less solid than you thought. "I'll need an hour to pack my things," I said. Mark blinked, clearly surprised. He'd probably prepared for arguments, for pleading, for anger. He'd probably rehearsed responses to all of it. Had HR approved phrases ready to deploy like sandbags against a flood. But I wasn't going to give him that. I wasn't going to give him anything. "David, let's talk about the transition plan." There's a severance package we can discuss, and an hour, I repeated. I walked out of conference room C for the last time, leaving him sitting there with his manila folder and his prepared speeches and his 30% solution. The hallway stretched before me, familiar as my own reflection, every door a memory, every corner a ghost of who I'd been just 30 minutes ago. My office was on the 4th floor, tucked between marketing and the supply closet that always smelled faintly of toner and desperation. I'd never minded the location, never minded that the window faced the parking lot instead of the city skyline, never minded that my desk was older than some of my colleagues, its surface scarred with the rings from 1,000 coffee cups and the dents from 1,000 frustrated fists. I minded now. I pulled the boxes from the supply closet, the same boxes I'd helped pack when Jennifer in accounting left, when Tom in sales got promoted, when Sarah in HR took early retirement. Now they were mine. 3 medium-sized cardboard boxes that would somehow contain 13 years of my professional life. The rain had intensified, drumming against my window like it was trying to get in, trying to tell me something. I started with the desk drawers, pens that barely worked, sticky notes with reminders for meetings that no longer mattered. A photo of Elena and the kids from 5 years ago, all of us squinting into the sun at some beach, whose name I couldn't remember. We looked happy in that photo, young, unaware of everything that was coming. I packed it carefully, wrapping it in an old project proposal that had never been approved. "You okay, David?" I looked up to find Marcus from IT standing in my doorway, concern creasing his face. Marcus, who I'd helped get promoted 3 years ago. Marcus, who still owed me for covering for him when he'd accidentally wiped the entire database and I'd spent 48 hours straight rebuilding it from backups. "Just cleaning up," I said, "because what else do you say? How do you explain that you've just been dismissed like a subscription service that auto-renewed one too many times?" "I heard," Marcus said quietly. "It's bullshit." I appreciated the solidarity, even if it didn't change anything. "It is what it is." "No." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "It's not. You know who they're replacing you with? Tyler Morrison, fresh out of college. Mark's golf buddy's son. Kid doesn't know the difference between a P&L statement and a parking ticket." Tyler Morrison. Of course. Not someone better, not someone with more experience or unique skills, just someone cheaper, someone connected, someone who proved that merit is just a word we use to make inequality sound fair. "Does Elena know?" Marcus asked. The question hit me like a physical thing. Elena, my wife, Mark's sister, the woman I'd been married to for 15 years, who'd been increasingly distant for the last 5, who'd stopped asking about my day and started spending more time at her brother's house, helping with family business she never quite explained. "Not yet," I said. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding all the complicated layers of that simple phrase. "Man, I'm sorry. If you need a reference, anything—" "Thanks, Marcus." I meant it. He left, and I went back to packing. The shelf with my awards. Employee of the Year 2018, Outstanding Performance 2020, Innovation Prize 2022. Meaningless now. Just plastic and cheap metal, participation trophies for a game I'd already lost. My phone buzzed. "Elena, how's your day going?" I stared at the message for a long moment. How do you answer that? How do you text back that your day has been a demolition, a dismantling, a systematic destruction of everything you'd built? I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "Fine." Home by 6. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Dinner at Mark's tonight. He invited us, said it's important." Of course he did. Of course he wanted us there. Wanted to see how I'd react. Wanted to watch me sit at his table and eat his food and pretend everything was normal while he'd just taken away my livelihood and, with it, a piece of my dignity I'd never get back. Or maybe he wanted to tell Elena himself. Maybe this was his way of controlling the narrative, of framing my firing as something reasonable, something unavoidable, something that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with those quarterly numbers he was always talking about. Okay, I texted back. I finished packing in silence. The rain continued its percussion against the window, and somewhere in the building, someone laughed, a sound so normal it felt obscene. I sealed the last box with packing tape that screeched like a small animal dying, and I looked around the office one final time. This is where I'd spent more waking hours than in my own home. This is where I'd sacrificed time with my children, watching them grow up through phone calls and video chats and brief morning encounters before I rushed out the door. This is where I'd poured everything I had into work that apparently could be replicated for 70% less. I picked up the first box. It was heavier than I expected, or maybe I was just weaker than I'd realized. I made it 3 steps toward the door when my phone rang. Not a text. A call. I almost didn't answer. I was done with this place, done with these people, done with pretending that loyalty meant anything in a world where you could be replaced by someone cheaper with a single meeting in a manila folder. But then I saw the caller ID, Richard Chen, CEO, the man at the top of the pyramid, the one who usually communicated through emails and company-wide memos and occasional appearances at town halls where he talked about our family and our mission with the practiced sincerity of someone who'd never had to worry about making rent. I answered. "Where are you?" His voice was clipped, urgent, completely different from the measured tones he used in public. "We have the quarterly review in 15 minutes. I need you in the executive conference room now." I looked at the boxes, at the empty shelves, at the photo of my family wrapped in a rejected proposal. "Richard," I said slowly, "I think there's been some confusion. I don't care what Mark just did," Richard interrupted. "I need you here, now. This isn't a request, David." And then he hung up, leaving me standing in my stripped office, holding a box full of things that no longer seemed to matter, trying to understand what was happening. Mark didn't know the CEO and I. The thought formed slowly like ice crystals on a window. Mark didn't know. How could he? We'd kept it quiet, professional, separate from the day-to-day operations. Richard had his reasons for the discretion, and I'd never questioned them, never needed to. But now... I set the box down carefully on my desk, pulled out my phone, sent a single text to Richard. "On my way. We need to talk." The response came immediately. "We certainly do." I walked out of my office, leaving the boxes behind, leaving the empty shelves behind, leaving the ghost of who I'd been just an hour ago behind. The elevator descended slowly, giving me time to think, time to plan, time to realize that this story, my story, was far from over. It was just beginning. And Mark had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. The executive conference room existed in a different atmosphere than the rest of the building. While we worked in cubicles with flickering lights and coffee-stained carpet, they inhabited a world of polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting you couldn't afford. I'd only been here a handful of times in 13 years, each visit to a reminder that hierarchies aren't just organizational charts. They're physical spaces designed to remind you where you stand, or where you don't. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that sounded like money. The hallway stretched before me, all marble and recessed lighting, and abstract art that probably cost more than my annual salary. Had cost more. Past tense again. I was going to have to get used to thinking in past tense about a lot of things. Richard's assistant, Margaret, looked up from her desk as I approached. She was somewhere in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows, and eyes that missed nothing. In the 3 years since Richard had become CEO, Margaret had become the gatekeeper to power, the translator of his moods, The person who could make or break your career with a single notation in her infamous leather planner. "David," she said, and something in her voice made me pause. Not surprise. Recognition, like she'd been expecting me. "He's waiting." She didn't say anything about the fact that I was supposed to be fired. Didn't ask why I was here. Just gestured toward the double doors with a small nod that might have been encouragement or warning or both. I knocked once, heard Richard's voice call out, and entered. The room was exactly as I remembered. Long table that could seat 20. Chairs that cost more than my first car. Windows that overlooked the city from a height that made problems seem smaller and solutions seem simpler. Richard stood at the far end, his back to me, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the rain-soaked skyline. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I did. "Sit." I didn't. Not yet. Something about the moment felt too precarious, too balanced on an edge I couldn't see. Sitting felt like surrendering before the negotiation had even begun. Richard turned then, and I saw what Margaret must have seen when he'd called her earlier. His face was composed, but his eyes were furious. Not at me, that much was clear, but furious nonetheless, like he'd just discovered that someone had been redecorating his house while he was on vacation. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, word for word. So I did. The meeting with Mark, the manila folder, the 30%, the hour to pack. I gave him the facts in the same tone I'd use for a quarterly report, stripped of emotion, clinical and precise. But even as I spoke, I watched his expression shift from fury to something colder, something calculating. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the bar cart in the corner, because of course there was a bar cart, and poured 2 glasses of scotch. Expensive scotch, the kind that comes in bottles with handwritten labels and tastes like smoke and oak and old money. He handed me one. Now I sat. "How long have we known each other, David?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me. 3 years, since you took over as CEO. "No," he shook his head. "How long have we really known each other?" I took a sip of the scotch. It burned in the best way. 7 years, since the Meridian Project. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The Meridian Project. The one that was supposed to sink the company. The one everyone said was impossible. The one you pulled off in 6 months with a team of 5 people and a budget that wouldn't cover a decent company party. I remembered. Of course, I remembered. It had been hell. 18-hour days, impossible deadlines, technical challenges that seemed designed by someone who hated us personally. But we'd done it. And Richard, who'd been VP of operations then, had noticed. "You saved my career with that project," he continued. "You know that, right? I'd staked everything on Meridian. If it failed, I was done. But it didn't fail. It succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. And do you know what I learned from watching you work?" I waited. That the most valuable people in any organization are the ones who don't need to remind everyone how valuable they are. They just do the work. They solve the problems. They make everyone around them better without needing credit or recognition or... He paused, his jaw tightening. Without needing to play politics or leverage family connections or replace competent people with incompetent ones just because they're cheaper. The pieces were starting to fit together. Like a puzzle I'd been staring at for so long I'd stopped seeing the picture. "Mark doesn't know about Meridian," I said slowly. "He doesn't know about our working relationship." "Mark doesn't know about a lot of things," Richard said, and there was an edge to his voice that could cut glass. "Mark thinks he runs his department autonomously. Mark thinks that because he's been here for 8 years and has the title of regional director, he has carte blanche to make personnel decisions without oversight. Mark is about to learn that he's been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of how this company works. I set down my glass carefully. Richard, he's family. Elena's brother. Whatever happens here will happen regardless of family connections, Richard interrupted. In fact, especially because of family connections. Do you know why I hired Mark in the first place? I shook my head. I didn't. The previous CEO did, as a favor to someone on the board. Mark came with recommendations and connections and a pedigree that looked impressive on paper. And for the first few years he was fine, adequate, met his numbers, managed his team, stayed out of trouble. But lately, Richard stood, walking back to the window. Lately I've been noticing discrepancies, small ones at first. Budget overruns that get absorbed elsewhere. Projects that fail but somehow don't affect his performance reviews. People leaving his department at twice the rate of any other division. The rain had intensified, sheets of water cascading down the windows like tears the building was crying for all of us. I've had an audit running for the past 2 months, Richard continued. Quiet, thorough, looking at everything Mark has touched in the last 3 years. And what we've found is interesting. Not illegal exactly, but creative. Expense reports that push boundaries. Contracts awarded to companies owned by friends. Performance metrics that have been massaged to look better than they are. And now this, firing one of the most competent people in the company to replace him with an unqualified nepotism hire at 30% of the salary. Tyler Morrison, I said. Marcus told me. Richard's laugh was bitter. Tyler Morrison, 23 years old, degree from a third-tier business school, 0 relevant experience. But his father owns Morrison and Associates, the consulting firm that Mark has awarded 17 contracts to in the last 18 months, totaling just over $2 million. The numbers landed like punches. $2 million, 17 contracts. And now Tyler, sliding into my position, presumably to provide inside information or favorable treatment or whatever other services justified that kind of expenditure. You're thinking quid pro quo, I said. I'm not thinking it. I'm proving it. Or I was until Mark decided to accelerate my timeline by firing you. Richard turned back to face me. The quarterly review we're about to have, it's not a standard review. It's an intervention. The board has questions, lots of questions, and Mark is about to answer them in front of everyone who matters. My phone buzzed. Elena again. Mark says, dinner is at 7. Don't be late. He has big news. I showed Richard the text. He read it, and his expression darkened further. Big news, he repeated. He's going to announce your firing as some kind of efficiency victory. Make himself look decisive and cost-conscious. Probably already has the narrative prepared. Nothing personal, just business. The company needs to adapt, blah, blah, blah. And Elena, I started. Doesn't know, Richard finished. About any of it. Not about the audit, not about Morrison, not about the fact that her brother has been playing fast and loose with company resources while building his own little empire. She certainly doesn't know that he just fired her husband as part of a scheme that's about to blow up in his face. I thought about Elena, about how she'd changed over the past year, more secretive, more defensive of Mark, more involved in family business that I wasn't privy to. I'd attributed it to stress, to the normal evolution of a long marriage, to my own absence and preoccupation with work. But now I wondered if there was more to it. If Mark had been preparing the ground, painting me as incompetent or unreliable, or whatever story he needed to tell to make my firing seem reasonable. What do you need from me? I asked. Richard smiled then, and this time it did reach his eyes. It was the smile of a chess player who'd just seen the winning move. I need you to do what you've always done. I need you to be competent, prepared, and honest. I need you in that quarterly review to present your department's performance metrics. And when Mark tries to explain why he fired you, I need you to let him talk. Let him dig the hole deeper. Can you do that? Could I? Could I sit in a room with the man who'd just fired me, who'd dismissed 13 years of work with a single meeting, who'd betrayed not just our professional relationship, but our family connection, and stay calm, stay professional? I thought about the boxes in my office, about Elena's text, about Tyler Morrison and his degree from a third-tier business school, about the 30%. Yes, I said, I can do that. Good. Richard checked his watch. They'll be arriving in 10 minutes. Mark doesn't know you're here. When he sees you, he's going to try to control the narrative. Don't let him. Just present your numbers. The numbers tell the story I need told. And after? I asked. After the review, after whatever happens with Mark, what then? Richard finished his scotch and set the glass down with a definitive click. After we talk about your actual role in this company. The one you should have had years ago. The one Mark has been blocking because he knew that if you rose to where you deserve to be, his own inadequacies would become impossible to hide. The door opened and Margaret stepped in. They're here, she said simply. Richard nodded. Send them in. All of them. Margaret's eyes flicked to me, and I saw something there. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction. She'd been watching this play out too. She'd known, probably before I did, what was coming. The first to enter was Sandra Kim, CFO, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen the numbers and didn't like what they said. Then James Whitmore, COO, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit perfectly tailored, his face perfectly neutral. Then Patricia Okonkwo, head of HR, with her leather portfolio and her careful, measured steps. And then Mark. He walked in mid-conversation with someone I didn't recognize, laughing at something, confident and relaxed. He looked up, saw me, and stopped so abruptly the person behind him nearly collided with his back. David? His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, anger, fear, then a forced calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. What are you doing here? I thought. You thought you'd fired him, Richard said pleasantly. Please, everyone, sit. We have a lot to discuss. Mark looked around the room, finally understanding that this wasn't the meeting he'd expected. That the ground had shifted beneath him just as surely as it had shifted beneath me an hour ago. But where I'd had no warning, no chance to prepare, he had an audience. Witnesses, people who would remember what happened next. Richard, I can explain, Mark started. I'm sure you can, Richard interrupted. But first, let's start with the quarterly review. David, if you would. I pulled out my laptop, opened the presentation I'd prepared a week ago, back when I'd still had a job, back when I'd believed that competence mattered and numbers spoke for themselves, back when I'd been naive enough to think that doing good work was enough. The screen lit up behind me. The title slide read, Q3 Performance Analysis, Regional Operations Division, Mark's division, my department. The numbers he'd been massaging and manipulating to make himself look good. The real numbers. I began to speak, and with every word, every chart, every data point, I watched Mark's carefully constructed world start to crumble. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating precision of truth told in a room where lies could no longer hide. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about Elena's text, about dinner at 7, about Mark's big news. This was going to be a very interesting evening. The first slide was deceptively simple, a bar graph showing revenue performance over the past 3 years. Clean lines, clear trends, the kind of visual that made sense even to people who didn't live and breathe spreadsheets the way I did. Mark shifted in his seat. I didn't look at him directly, but I could feel his discomfort radiating across the table like heat from a furnace. Q3 revenue for regional operations came in at $42 million, I said, my voice steady, professional, empty of everything I was feeling. This represents a 12% increase over Q3 last year and puts us 17% above our projected target. Sandra Kim made a note on her tablet. James Whitmore nodded slightly. Patricia Okonkwo watched Mark with the particular intensity of someone who'd already read the report and was waiting to see how the protagonist would react to the plot twist. Now, if we break that down by division, I clicked to the next slide. This was where it got interesting. 5 divisions under Mark's umbrella, each represented by a different color. 4 of them showed modest growth, 3 to 5%, respectable but unremarkable. Standard performance for a standard market. And then there was mine, the blue bar that stretched twice as high as any other. 28% growth, nearly half of the entire division's revenue coming from a single department with a team of 12 people. David's department has consistently outperformed every other unit in regional operations. I continued, speaking about myself in third person, like I was describing a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the David who'd walked into Mark's office an hour ago was a different person than the one standing here now. In fact, over the past 3 years, his team has generated 63% of the division's total growth, while representing only 18% of the division's headcount. I let that hang in the air for a moment. 63% of growth, 18% of headcount. The math wasn't complicated, but its implications were devastating. Mark cleared his throat. David, I think we need to contextualize these numbers. Revenue isn't the only metric that matters. We have to consider cost efficiency, resource allocation. Excellent point, Richard interrupted smoothly. Let's look at cost efficiency next. David? I clicked to the next slide. This one showed cost per dollar of revenue across all 5 departments. Lower was better. My department's bar was the shortest by a significant margin. For every dollar of revenue generated, I explained, David's department spends 62 cents. The division average is 84 cents. This means his team is operating at approximately 26% greater efficiency than the rest of regional operations. Patricia Okonkwo leaned forward. And what accounts for this efficiency difference? It was a loaded question. She knew the answer. We all knew the answer, but she wanted it said aloud, wanted it on the record. Several factors, I said. Streamlined processes, cross-training that reduces redundancy, strategic vendor relationships that provide better rates, and minimal executive oversight requirements, which reduce administrative burden. That last one landed exactly as intended. Minimal executive oversight. Translation. Mark hadn't been paying attention to what we did, which meant we'd been free to actually do our jobs well. I see. Patricia made another note. And employee retention? I clicked to the next slide. Employee turnover rates, year over year, department by department. Mark's face had gone pale. David's department has maintained a 94% retention rate over the past 3 years, I said. The division average is 67%. In concrete terms, that means that while other departments have had to continuously recruit, train, and onboard new employees at an estimated cost of 40 to 60% of each employee's annual salary, David's team has remained stable, experienced, and increasingly effective. Sandra Kim looked up from her tablet. What's the estimated cost savings from that retention differential? I'd known this question was coming, had calculated the answer weeks ago when I'd first noticed the pattern. Approximately $2.4 million over 3 years. The number echoed in the silence. 2.4 million. Saved not through dramatic restructuring or aggressive cost-cutting, but through the simple act of creating an environment where people wanted to stay. This is all very impressive, Mark said, and I could hear the strain in his voice, the desperation of someone trying to redirect a conversation that had gotten away from them. But it proves my point about efficiency. If David's team can perform at this level, imagine what we could do with someone at 30% of his salary. We could maintain the same performance while significantly reducing our cost structure. It was a reasonable argument, I had to admit, on the surface anyway, the kind of logic that looked good in a PowerPoint presentation, that made executives feel smart for identifying redundant costs. But Richard wasn't smiling. That's an interesting theory, he said. Let's test it. David, could you show us the slide about succession planning and knowledge transfer? I clicked forward. This slide was different from the others, not charts and graphs, but a detailed organizational diagram showing the flow of expertise within my department. Who knew what? Who could do what? The intricate web of relationships and skills that made a team function as more than just the sum of its parts. In preparing for standard business continuity scenarios, I documented the critical functions of my role. As you can see, there are 47 distinct responsibilities, ranging from client relationship management to technical architecture oversight to strategic planning to team development. Of these, 32 require specific domain expertise that takes an average of 3 to 5 years to develop. 15 require institutional knowledge about our clients, their systems, and their unique requirements that cannot be documented or transferred in any meaningful time frame. I paused, letting them absorb the complexity. Now, Mark, you mentioned replacing me with someone at 30% of my salary. Could you tell us who that person is and how their qualifications map to these requirements? It was a direct challenge, delivered in the most professional tone possible. I was giving him rope, just as Richard had asked. The question was whether he'd use it to climb out or to hang himself. Mark's jaw tightened. Tyler Morrison. He's a recent graduate from— I'm familiar with Mr. Morrison, Richard interrupted. Business degree from Ashford University. 3-month internship at a marketing firm. No technical background. No client management experience. No expertise in our industry sector. Is that accurate? He's young and eager to learn, Mark said defensively. Sometimes fresh perspective is more valuable than experience, and at his salary level, we could afford to hire additional support staff if needed. So to replace one person at 100% cost, Sandra Kim said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. You'd hire one person at 30% cost plus additional support staff, which means the total cost would be, what, 50%, 60%? And you're proposing this as a cost-saving measure? Mark opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. It's not just about immediate costs. It's about long-term sustainability. We can't be dependent on any single person. We need redundancy. We need competent leadership, Patricia Okonkwo said quietly. Which brings us to the real reason we're here today. She opened her leather portfolio and removed a document, slid it across the table to Mark. I couldn't see what it was from where I stood, but I watched the color drain from his face as he read it. That, Patricia continued, is a summary of the audit findings regarding your department's operations over the past 18 months. I think everyone here should hear the highlights. May I, Richard? Richard nodded. Patricia pulled out her own tablet, tapped it a few times, and began to read in that careful, measured tone that HR professionals use when they're about to end someone's career. Finding 1. Between March 2024 and September 2025, Regional Operations awarded 17 contracts to Morrison & Associates, a consulting firm owned by Harold Morrison, father of Tyler Morrison. Total value, $2.1 million. Of these contracts, only 3 were subject to competitive bidding. The remaining 14 were awarded through sole source justification signed by Mark Castellano. Mark's hands were shaking. I could see them trembling against the table, see him trying to steady them and failing. Finding 2, performance metrics for regional operations have been consistently reported as meeting or exceeding targets. However, when accounting methodologies are standardized across divisions, actual performance is approximately 15% below reported figures. This discrepancy is primarily due to inconsistent recognition of revenue timing and creative allocation of shared costs. James Whitmore's expression had gone from neutral to granite. Finding 3. Employee retention in regional operations is 67%, as David noted. However, this number masks significant variation. David's department, 94%. The other 4 departments under Mark's direct supervision, average 52%. Exit interviews from departing employees cite poor leadership, lack of support, and favoritism as primary reasons for leaving. Each finding was a nail. Patricia was building a coffin, one careful word at a time. Finding 4. In the past 6 months, 3 formal complaints have been filed regarding Mark's management practices. These were not escalated to corporate HR as required by policy. Instead, they were resolved at the division level with non-disclosure agreements and severance packages totaling $430,000. I hadn't known about this, hadn't known that other people had tried to speak up, had tried to push back, and had been silenced with money and legal agreements. How many others were there? How long had this been going on? And finding 5, Patricia said, her voice taking on an edge that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. At 2:47 p.m. today, Mark Castellano terminated David Chen's employment, citing cost reduction and restructuring. This termination was executed without required approval from corporate HR, without consultation with the executive team, and in direct violation of the company's personnel policies regarding senior staff. It was also executed approximately 40 minutes before this scheduled quarterly review, where these audit findings were to be presented. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Mark had known. Somehow he'd known about the audit, or suspected it, and he'd tried to preemptively eliminate the person whose performance made his own inadequacies impossible to ignore. "Mark," Richard said, and his voice was quiet now, almost gentle, the quiet before the storm. "Do you have anything to say?" Mark looked around the table, at Sandra with her tablet full of damning numbers, at James with his expression of granite disappointment, at Patricia with her portfolio of evidence, at Richard with his quiet fury, and finally at me. I saw something in his eyes then, not remorse exactly, not even real understanding of what he'd done wrong, just the panicked realization that he'd miscalculated, that the game he'd been playing had rules he hadn't understood, and that he was about to lose everything. "This is a witch hunt," he said finally. "You've been looking for reasons to get rid of me, and you're using my family connection to David to justify it. This is discrimination. I have rights. You have exactly the rights outlined in your employment contract," Richard said, and now the gentleness was gone, replaced by the cold precision of a CEO who'd made a decision and wouldn't be moved. "Which includes immediate termination for cause in cases of gross misconduct, policy violations, or actions detrimental to the company's interests. Patricia?" Patricia removed another document from her portfolio, placed it in front of Mark. "Effective immediately. You are suspended with pay pending a full investigation into these findings. You are required to surrender your building access, your company devices, and any proprietary materials in your possession. You will not contact any current employees, clients, or vendors regarding company business. You will make yourself available for interviews with our legal team. Do you understand?" Mark stared at the document like it was written in a language he didn't speak. "Do you understand?" Patricia repeated. "Yes," Mark whispered. "Then I need you to sign here, acknowledging receipt of this notice." He signed. His hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings," Patricia continued. "You have 15 minutes. As if on cue, the door opened. 2 security guards stood waiting, their faces professionally blank. Mark stood slowly, looked at me one last time, and I saw it then. The moment he realized that I'd known, that I'd stood here presenting my numbers, professional and calm, knowing exactly what was coming, that I'd let him talk, let him dig deeper, let him try to justify the unjustifiable, that I'd helped hang him with his own rope. "David," he said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice. Elena is going to, this is going to, Elena is your sister, I said quietly. Not my problem to solve. He left with the guards, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the period at the end of a very long sentence. The silence that followed was profound. Richard stood, walked to the window, looked out at the rain that was finally beginning to ease. Well, he said, that was unpleasant. Necessary, Sandra corrected. But yes, unpleasant. David, Richard said, turning back to face me. I apologize that you had to experience any of this. You shouldn't have been put in this position. What happens now? I asked. Now? Richard smiled slightly. Now we talk about your actual job title and compensation, the one that reflects your actual value to this company. But first, he checked his watch. Don't you have a dinner to get to? Elena's text. Mark's house, 7 o'clock. The big news that would never be delivered. Yes, I said. I suppose I do. The rain had stopped by the time I left the building, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, bruised purple and gray, like the aftermath of a fight. The parking lot stretched before me, familiar as the lines on my own palm, and I walked to my car in a daze, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of 3 hours. Fired, unfired, witness to the destruction of my brother-in-law's career, offered a promotion I hadn't asked for and wasn't sure I wanted. My phone buzzed. Elena again. Mark says you're coming straight from work? We're having wine. His favorite Bordeaux. Says it's celebratory. I sat in my car, engine off, staring at that message. Celebratory. Mark had planned this as a celebration. He'd intended to gather the family, pour expensive wine, and announce that he'd made the tough but necessary decision to restructure his department. He'd probably prepared remarks, practiced his delivery, imagined Elena's support, her understanding, her inevitable agreement that sometimes business requires difficult choices. He'd imagined wrong. I started the car. The clock on the dashboard read 5:47. 13 minutes to get home, change clothes, and somehow figure out how to navigate a dinner that Mark no longer controlled, but Elena didn't yet know was canceled. Except it wasn't canceled, was it? Elena had invited me. Mark had invited us. The dinner was still happening, just without Mark's planned script. My phone rang. Not Elena this time. Richard. Don't tell her, he said without preamble. Not tonight. Not until we've completed the investigation and made final determinations about Mark's status. Richard, she's my wife. She's going to know something's wrong. She's going to ask why Mark isn't. Mark will handle that part himself, Richard interrupted. Or he won't. Either way, it's not your responsibility to manage his family communications. Your responsibility is to protect yourself and protect this company's interests, which means not discussing confidential personnel matters with anyone, including your wife. Especially your wife, given the family relationship. I understood the logic, understood the legal necessity, but understanding didn't make it easier. What do I tell her when she asks about work? I said, when she asks how my day was. Tell her the truth. You had a long day. You had meetings. You're tired. All of which is accurate. He paused. David, I know this is complicated. I know family dynamics are going to make this harder. But Mark made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. You can't protect him from that, and you shouldn't try. I'm not trying to protect him, I said, and realized as I said it that it was true. Whatever familial obligation I might have felt had evaporated the moment Mark had sat across from me and told me I was replaceable. I'm trying to protect her. Then protect her by not putting her in a position where she has to choose between defending her brother and supporting her husband. Not yet. Not until the facts are clear and the decisions are final. He was right. I hated that he was right, but he was. Okay, I said. I won't tell her tonight. Good. We'll talk tomorrow, 9 a.m. My office. We have a lot to discuss about your future here. He hung up, and I sat in the parking lot as the last light bled from the sky, watching other people leave the building, heading to their cars, their homes, their normal lives. People who hadn't been fired and unfired in the same afternoon. People who didn't have to go home and pretend everything was fine while their world rearranged itself into patterns they didn't yet recognize. I pulled out of the parking lot at 5:51. The drive home took me through the city center, past the courthouse where Elena and I had gotten married 15 years ago, in a small ceremony with just our families and a few close friends. Mark had been there, young and confident, and full of promises about how he'd always take care of his little sister. How family came first, always. I wondered what he was doing right now, packing his office probably, with security guards watching to make sure he didn't take anything he shouldn't. Trying to figure out how to explain this to his wife, Sarah. Trying to craft a narrative that made him the victim instead of the architect of his own destruction. Or maybe he was calling Elena, warning her, preparing her, painting me as the villain who'd somehow orchestrated his downfall. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it at a red light. Can't wait to see you. Mark's been so excited about tonight. Says he has something important to share about the future. The future. A future that no longer existed the way Mark had imagined it. I pulled into our driveway at 6:04. The house looked the same as it always did. Two-story colonial, blue shutters that needed repainting, lawn that needed mowing, porch light that I kept forgetting to replace. Home in all its imperfect familiarity. Elena's car was already there. She'd beaten me home, probably left work early to help Mark prepare for dinner. I could see lights on in the kitchen through the window, could imagine her moving through our space, getting ready, completely unaware that the evening she was anticipating bore no resemblance to the evening that would actually unfold. I sat in the car for a moment, gathering myself, trying to decide who I needed to be when I walked through that door. The David who'd left this morning, the David who'd been fired at 2 o'clock, the David who'd stood in the executive conference room and watched his brother-in-law implode. None of them. I needed to be someone else entirely, someone who could navigate this minefield without detonating anything until the time was right. I got out of the car. The air smelled like rain and cut grass and the neighbor's grill. Normal smells. Normal evening. Except nothing about this was normal. Elena met me at the door before I could even get my keys out. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The one she said made her feel elegant. Her hair was down, curled the way she used to wear it when we first started dating. She'd put on makeup, subtle but deliberate, and she was smiling. She was happy. "You're home," she said and kissed me quickly. "I was worried you'd be late. Mark specifically said 6:30, and you know how he gets about punctuality." "Traffic wasn't bad," I said, stepping inside. The house smelled like her perfume and the vanilla candles she loved. "What's the occasion? You look beautiful." She blushed slightly, pleased. "Mark said it was important. A celebration. I wanted to look nice." She paused, studying my face. "Are you okay? You look tired." "Long day," I said, which was both true and catastrophically inadequate. "Lots of meetings." "Well, you have time for a quick shower. I laid out your gray suit, the one Mark got you for Christmas." Of course she had. Of course Mark had bought me a suit, expensive and well-tailored, probably from the same place he bought his own clothes. I'd wondered at the time why he'd been so generous. Now I understood. It was an investment. Dress the part, look the part, be the part of the competent employee who made him look good by association. I showered quickly, standing under water that was too hot, trying to wash away the residue of the day. But some things don't wash off. Some things sink into your skin and stay there, permanent as scars. The gray suit fit perfectly. I'd worn it to company events, client meetings, presentations where I needed to project confidence and capability. It felt different now, knowing where it came from, knowing what it represented. I came downstairs at 6:23. Elena was in the kitchen checking her phone, frowning slightly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Mark hasn't confirmed the time," she said. "He usually sends a text when we're supposed to head over, but I haven't heard from him. Let me try calling." She dialed. I watched her face as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. "That's weird," she said. "He never ignores my calls, especially when we have plans." She tried again. Same result. "Maybe he's just busy," I offered, knowing it was a lie, knowing that Mark was probably sitting somewhere trying to figure out how to tell his sister that he'd just lost everything. Maybe. But she didn't sound convinced. She tried Sarah, Mark's wife. That call went to voicemail too. "Okay, this is strange. Maybe we should just drive over, make sure everything's all right?" "Elena," I started, then stopped. What could I say? What was I allowed to say? "What?" She looked at me, and I saw something shift in her expression, concern bleeding into suspicion. "David, do you know something? Did something happen?" "I had a long day," I repeated carefully. "A complicated day. Maybe we should stay home tonight. Let Mark reach out when he's ready." "When he's ready for what?" Her voice had an edge now. "What aren't you telling me?" "I can't." I stopped, started again. "There are things I can't talk about. Work things, confidential things. Work things that involve my brother." I didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Elena set down her phone slowly. "He did something, didn't he? At work. Something that involves you." When I still didn't respond, her eyes widened. "Oh my God, did he fire you? Is that what this is about?" The question hung between us like a blade. "It's complicated," I said. "Complicated how? Did he or didn't he?" "He tried to." "Tried to?" She shook her head, trying to process. "What does that even mean? You either fired someone or you didn't." "He thought he had the authority. He was wrong." I watched her face as the implications sank in. Her brother had tried to fire me, had actually gone through with it, had called me into a meeting, had delivered the news. And then what? Something had stopped it. Something had gone wrong with his plan. "Where is he now?" she asked quietly. "David, where is my brother?" "I don't know," I said, which was technically true. I didn't know where Mark was physically. Didn't know if he'd gone home or to a bar or just started driving with no destination in mind. "But Elena, there are things I legally can't discuss. Personnel matters. Investigations." "Investigations?" Her voice rose. "What kind of investigations?" Before I could answer, her phone rang. We both looked at it. Sarah's name on the screen. Elena answered, putting it on speaker. "Sarah, is David there?" Sarah's voice was strained, tight, with barely controlled emotion. "I need to talk to David." "I'm here," I said. "What did you do?" Sarah demanded. "Mark came home an hour ago with security guards. They watched him pack his things. He's been suspended. They're investigating him for—" Her voice broke. "What did you do to him?" "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I showed up for a meeting and presented my department's performance metrics. That's all." "That's all?" Sarah laughed, but it was bitter, empty of humor. "He said you set him up, that you've been feeding information to Richard Chen, undermining him, making him look bad so you could take his position." Elena was staring at me, her expression unreadable. "That's not true," I said. "I've done my job. Nothing more, nothing less. If Mark's facing consequences, it's because of his own choices, not mine." "His own choices?" "He gave you a job when you had nothing. He brought you into this company, gave you opportunities, trusted you with his department. And this is how you repay him? By destroying his career?" "He tried to fire me today," I said quietly. Told me they found someone who could do my job for 30% of my salary. Gave me an hour to pack my things. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly grateful for his trust. Silence on the other end. Then, Elena, are you hearing this? Are you hearing what your husband did to your brother? Elena looked at me, really looked at me, searching my face for something. Truth, maybe, or confirmation that the man she'd married was still the man she thought she knew. Sarah, she said slowly, I'm going to call you back. Elena, don't let him. Elena hung up, set the phone down, crossed her arms. Tell me everything, she said. Right now. All of it. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in, the familiar space transformed into an interrogation room where I was both witness and defendant. Elena stood across from me, still in that blue dress, still beautiful, but her expression had hardened into something I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did recognize it, and that was worse. Maybe I'd just been choosing not to see it for months, years, however long she'd been slowly shifting away from me and toward her brother's version of reality. Everything, she repeated. Now. I pulled out a chair, sat down. My legs felt suddenly unstable, like they'd been holding me up through sheer force of will and had finally decided to quit. I can't tell you everything. There are legal restrictions, confidentiality agreements. Screw the legal restrictions, Elena snapped. This is my brother, my family, and apparently my husband just destroyed his career, so I think I'm entitled to know why. I didn't destroy anything, I said, and heard the edge creep into my own voice. Mark destroyed himself. I just happened to be standing there when it all fell apart. That's not an answer. That's a deflection. She pulled out the chair across from me, sat down hard. Start at the beginning. This morning. What happened? So I told her. Not everything. I couldn't legally and ethically, but enough. The meeting with Mark, the manila folder, the 30%, the way he'd looked at me like I was a line item on a budget that needed to be eliminated. Elena listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each sentence. He gave you an hour, she said when I finished. Just an hour. An hour to pack 13 years into 3 cardboard boxes. And then what? You went to Richard Chen? Richard called me. I didn't go to him. He didn't even know Mark had fired me until I told him. Why would Richard call you during a quarterly review if he didn't know you'd been fired? It was a good question, a smart question, the kind of question that revealed exactly how much Elena didn't know about my actual role in the company, my actual relationship with the CEO, my actual value beyond what Mark had told her. Because I was supposed to be there, I said. Because I always present the regional operations performance metrics. Because Richard relies on my analysis and Mark. I stopped, recalibrated. Mark apparently didn't think it was important to inform anyone that he'd just eliminated the person responsible for half the presentation. Elena shook her head slowly. This doesn't make sense. Mark wouldn't just fire you without telling anyone, without going through proper channels. He's meticulous about policy and procedure. Is he? I asked quietly. Or is that just what you've been told? Her eyes flashed. What's that supposed to mean? It means that Mark has been operating under assumptions about his own authority that turned out to be incorrect. It means he's been making decisions that should have required oversight, but somehow didn't get it. It means... I stopped myself before I said too much. It means what, David? Finish the sentence. It means there's an audit, has been for 2 months, looking into various aspects of how Mark runs his department, and today, during that quarterly review, some of those findings came to light. What kind of findings? The kind I can't discuss. Can't or won't. Both. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, stared out at our backyard, where the kids' old swing set still stood, rusting and unused. We'd meant to take it down years ago, but somehow never got around to it. Just like we'd meant to have conversations about a lot of things and never quite found the time. Sarah said, "You've been feeding information to Richard," Elena said, her back still to me. "Have you?" "No, I've been doing my job. If that job involved providing accurate performance data to the CEO, then yes, I've done that. But I haven't been undermining Mark or sabotaging him or whatever story he's constructed to make himself the victim here." "He gave you that job, David." She turned to face me. "When we were struggling, when we had a baby on the way and bills we couldn't pay, he gave you that job. That means something. That should mean something." "It did mean something," I said, "and for 13 years it meant loyalty. It meant working 80-hour weeks to make his numbers look good. It meant taking on projects no one else wanted and making them succeed. It meant building a team that generated 63% of his division's growth, while he took credit in executive meetings I wasn't invited to. You're exaggerating. I'm not. Those are the actual numbers I presented today. 63% of growth, 18% of headcount. You can verify them yourself if you don't believe me." Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then silenced it without reading the message. "Mark said you've been after his position for years, that you've been resentful of his authority, trying to undermine him so you could take over the department. When did he tell you that?" "What?" "When did Mark tell you I was resentful and trying to undermine him? Because I'm genuinely curious when these conversations happened that I apparently wasn't part of." She hesitated. "We talk. He's my brother. He confides in me about work stress, about challenges with his team, about me specifically," I interrupted. "When did he start talking to you about me specifically?" "I don't know. A few months ago, maybe longer. He said you'd been acting different, distant, less engaged. He was worried about you, actually, worried that you were burnt out or looking for other opportunities." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "Worried about me. Right. So worried that he fired me to protect me from my own burnout." "That's not. He didn't say he was going to fire you. He never mentioned anything about—" She stopped, her expression shifting as something occurred to her. "He's been talking about restructuring, about bringing in fresh talent, new perspectives. He said the industry was changing and we needed to adapt or die. I thought he meant the company. I didn't realize he meant your job." "Did he tell you about Tyler Morrison?" "Who?" "The person he hired to replace me, at 30% of my salary. The 23-year-old with no experience whose father owns a consulting firm that Mark has awarded over $2 million in contracts to over the past 18 months. Elena's face went white. $2 million? That's one of the audit findings. I probably shouldn't have told you that. But since we're apparently being honest about everything, I trailed off. She sat back down slowly, like her legs had given out the same way mine had earlier. He wouldn't do that. Mark wouldn't engage in that kind of corruption. It's not necessarily corruption. It might be poor judgment. It might be conflict of interest that he didn't properly disclose. It might be a lot of things that fall into gray areas. But it's definitely something that the company's legal team is going to spend a lot of time investigating. And you just happened to present your numbers at exactly the right time to make him look bad. I presented the same numbers I present every quarter. The only difference is that this time people were actually paying attention to what they meant. Elena's phone buzzed again, and again. She picked it up, scrolled through messages, her expression growing more strained with each one. "Sarah's saying you ambushed him," she said quietly. "That you knew about the audit and used it to get revenge for the firing. That you could have warned him, could have given him a chance to address the issues before they became public, but you chose not to because you wanted to see him destroyed. I found out about the audit today, same time Mark did, and even if I'd known earlier, Warning him would have made me complicit in whatever he was doing wrong. Would you have wanted me to do that? Help him cover up problems? I would have wanted you to protect my brother. The words exploded out of her, raw and honest and painful. She immediately looked like she regretted them, but they hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. More than you'd want me to do the right thing? I asked quietly. He's family, David. So am I. It's different, and you know it. Different how? Because we're married? Because we have kids together? Because I've spent 15 years building a life with you? I heard my voice rising and forced it back down. Or different because blood means more than vows? Elena's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Mark firing me wasn't fair. Mark spending years undermining me to you wasn't fair. Mark putting me in a position where I have to choose between my job and my family isn't fair. So tell me, Elena, what part of this should I be handling more fairly? You could have come to me, before today, before any of this. You could have told me there were problems with Mark's management, that you were concerned about his decisions. We could have addressed it as a family. Would you have believed me? The question stopped her. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. If I had come to you 6 months ago, I continued, and told you I thought Mark was playing favorites, awarding contracts to friends, manipulating performance metrics, would you have believed me? Or would you have defended him, told me I was being paranoid or resentful or that I didn't understand the full picture? I don't know, she whispered. I do, I said. You would have defended him, because that's what you've been doing for months now. Every time I mentioned work stress, every time I said Mark was making questionable decisions, every time I tried to hint that things weren't right, you took his side. You explained away my concerns. You made me feel like I was the problem. That's not true, isn't it? 2 months ago, I told you I was concerned about the Morrison contracts. Remember that? I mentioned over dinner that Mark was awarding a lot of work to the same firm without competitive bidding. And you said, what did you say, Elena? She looked away. You said that Mark knew what he was doing, that he had business reasons I didn't understand, that I should trust his judgment because he was the director and I wasn't. Those were your exact words. I was trying to reduce conflict, trying to keep peace between you two. You were choosing sides. You just didn't realize it at the time. Her phone rang. Not Sarah this time. Mark himself. We both stared at it, watching his name flash on the screen, listening to the ringtone that Elena had customized for him. Some upbeat song about family and loyalty that now felt like a sick joke. Answer it, I said. He's going to tell you his version anyway. Might as well hear it now. Elena picked up the phone with shaking hands, put it on speaker. Elena? Mark's voice sounded wrecked, hollow. Have you talked to Sarah? Yes. Then you know what David did to me. I started to speak, but Elena held up her hand, waiting. He set me up, Mark continued. Him and Richard Chen. They've been planning this for months, looking for ways to get rid of me. The audit, the investigation, it's all manufactured. Selective enforcement. Every single thing they're accusing me of, other directors do the same things. But because David wanted my job, because he resented me for being his boss. Mark, Elena interrupted, did you fire David today? Silence on the other end. Did you? She pressed. It was a business decision, nothing personal. The company needed to cut costs and his salary was, did you tell anyone you were planning to do it? I don't need permission to manage my own department. That's not what I asked. More silence. Then, Elena, whose side are you on here? I'm your brother, your family, this guy. The disdain in his voice when he said, this guy, was like a slap. This guy just destroyed my career because I made a tough decision he didn't like, and you're interrogating me like I'm the one who did something wrong. Elena looked at me. I looked back, waiting to see which way this would fall. Waiting to see if 15 years of marriage could compete with a lifetime of sibling loyalty. "I'm on the side of the truth," she said finally. "And right now, I'm not sure I know what that is. But Mark, did you really award $2 million in contracts to Tyler Morrison's father's company? Who told you that? That's confidential information. He stopped. "David told you. He's violating company policy by discussing confidential audit findings. That's grounds for termination itself, Elena. He just gave you proof that he—" "Stop," Elena said, and her voice cracked. "Just stop, both of you. I need to think. I need time." "Elena, don't let him manipulate you. He's been lying to you for months, making me look bad, poisoning you against—" She hung up, set the phone down, looked at me with eyes full of tears and confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding or might have been the end of trust. I couldn't tell which. "I need you to leave," she said, quietly. "What?" "Not the house. I need space. I need to process this. Can you go for a drive or something? Give me an hour?" I stood slowly. "Elena, please." So I left, walked out of my own kitchen, out of my own house, got in my car and drove with no destination in mind. Just drove through suburban streets as night fell completely, watching lights come on in other people's windows, other people's lives, wondering how many of them were imploding as quietly and completely as mine. My phone buzzed. "Richard, tomorrow, 9 a.m. We'll figure this out." And then another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize. "You're going to regret this. You have no idea what you've started." No name, no signature. But I knew who it was from. Mark wasn't done fighting, and neither was I. I drove until I ran out of streets I recognized, until the suburban sprawl gave way to industrial parks and strip malls closed for the night, their parking lots empty except for the occasional security guard's vehicle. The dashboard clock read 8:47 p.m. I'd been driving for over an hour, accomplishing nothing except burning gas and avoiding the inevitable return to a house where my wife was presumably deciding whether our marriage could survive her brother's implosion, or my role in it, or both. I pulled into a 24-hour diner that looked like it had been deposited from the 1950s and forgotten by time. Chrome and neon and red vinyl booths occupied by third-shift workers and insomniacs and other people who had nowhere else to be at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. The waitress, Donna, according to her name tag, poured me coffee without asking, and left a menu I didn't intend to read. My phone sat on the table between me and the coffee, dark and silent. I'd turned off notifications an hour ago, couldn't handle the constant buzzing of messages I wasn't ready to read. But curiosity eventually won over self-preservation, and I unlocked the screen. 43 missed texts, 17 missed calls, 3 voicemails. I started with the voicemails, because apparently I enjoyed torturing myself. The first was from Marcus in IT, his voice careful and measured. "Hey man, word spreading about what happened. I don't know all the details, but I wanted you to know that a lot of us have your back. Whatever you need, let me know." The second was from Jennifer in accounting, someone I'd helped train years ago. "David, I heard Mark got suspended. I just wanted to say, look, he was my boss too, and I've been documenting some things for a while now. Things I didn't know who to report to. If there's an investigation, if they need witnesses, I'm willing to talk." The third was from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakable. Tyler Morrison, the 23-year-old who was supposed to replace me at 30% of my salary. "Mr. Chen, this is Tyler Morrison. I got a call today from someone in HR saying that the position I'd been offered was on hold pending an internal review. I don't understand what's happening, but my dad is really upset. And he's saying that you sabotaged the whole thing because you were mad about being let go. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry if I caused problems. I didn't know. I mean, Mark said it was all approved and that you were ready to retire anyway and that I'd be getting training and the message cut off. Either he'd run out of time or run out of nerve, ready to retire. That's what Mark had told him. Not fired, not replaced. Ready to retire at 42, apparently eager to hand over my department to someone who couldn't tell a profit margin from a parking space. I moved to the texts. Most were from colleagues expressing support or confusion or carefully worded curiosity about what had actually happened. A few were from people asking if the rumors were true. One was from my sister, who'd somehow heard through the family grapevine that there was drama and wanted to know if I was okay. And then there were the texts from Mark, 6 of them sent in rapid succession around 8:15 while I'd been driving aimlessly and Elena had been processing everything I'd told her. You destroyed me. I gave you everything, and you destroyed me. Elena will never forgive you for this. You think Richard Chen is your friend? He'll use you up and throw you away just like he's doing to me. This isn't over. You're going to wish you'd just taken the severance. I read them twice, looking for any hint of self-awareness, any acknowledgement that he'd brought this on himself. Found none. Just rage and betrayal and the wounded entitlement of someone who'd never been held accountable before. My phone buzzed with a new text. Elena, are you coming home? I stared at those 4 words, trying to decode their meaning. Was it an invitation? A question? A test? Do you want me to? I typed it back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I don't know. At least it was honest. I'm at Fletcher's Diner on Route 9. I can stay here as long as you need. That place is depressing. So is everything else right now. No response. I set the phone down and took a sip of coffee. It was terrible, burnt and bitter, and probably made hours ago. But it was hot, and it gave me something to do with my hands. Donna reappeared. You eating or just decorating? Just coffee for now. Tough day? You could say that. She refilled my cup without being asked, a gesture so casually kind that I felt something crack in my chest. Whatever it is, it'll look different in the morning. Not better, necessarily, just different. She left before I could respond, moving on to refill other cups, to deliver other small kindnesses to other people, having other terrible nights. My phone rang. Not Elena. Richard. You shouldn't be calling me, I said by way of greeting. Probably not, he agreed. But I wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay. I'm sitting in a diner drinking bad coffee, while my wife decides if she can stay married to someone who helped destroy her brother's career. So, you know, living the dream. You didn't destroy his career, David. He did that himself. Elena doesn't see it that way. Mark doesn't see it that way. And honestly, Richard, I'm not sure I see it that way either. Silence on the other end. Then, explain. I watched the steam rise from my coffee, curling and dissipating in patterns that made sense for half a second before dissolving into nothing. I could have said something earlier. Could have pulled Mark aside months ago when I first noticed the Morrison contracts. Could have tried to warn him that he was crossing lines, that someone was going to notice eventually. But I didn't. I just kept my head down and did my job and let him keep digging. That's not your responsibility. You're not his keeper. No, but I'm his brother-in-law. I'm married to his sister. That creates obligations that go beyond corporate org charts. David, let me tell you something about family obligations, Richard said, and his voice had taken on an edge I hadn't heard before. I have 3 brothers. 2 of them are incredibly successful, ethical, hardworking people who built their careers on merit. The 3rd one is a disaster. He's been fired from 6 jobs in 10 years for various combinations of incompetence, dishonesty, and poor judgment. And every single time, he expects me to fix it, to give him another chance, to use my position to get him hired somewhere else. And every single time, I have to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right. What do you choose? What's right, every time. Because enabling someone's dysfunction isn't loyalty, David. It's cowardice disguised as love. And it doesn't help them. It just delays the inevitable reckoning and makes it worse when it finally comes. I thought about that. About all the times over the years when I'd noticed Mark cutting corners or playing favorites or making decisions that seemed designed to benefit him more than the company. All the times I'd rationalized it as just how business worked, or told myself it wasn't my place to say anything, or convinced myself that the dysfunction I was seeing was normal. I should have told Elena, I said. Not about the audit. I couldn't have done that. But about my concerns. About what I was seeing. I should have been honest with her instead of trying to keep the peace. Would she have listened? I don't know. Probably not. But I should have tried. Maybe, Richard conceded. But that's a different failure than the one Mark is accusing you of, and it's one you can potentially repair. Mark's failures, those are going to take a lot longer to fix, if they can be fixed at all. What happens next? With the investigation? HR and legal will spend the next week interviewing people, reviewing documents, building a timeline of decisions and contracts and communications. They'll look at everything Mark has touched in the last 2 years, and then they'll make a recommendation to this board about whether this rises to the level of termination for cause or if it's something we can address with lesser consequences. What do you think they'll recommend? Richard was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I think Mark's done. The Morrison contracts alone are probably enough for termination. Add in the policy violations around your firing, the NDAs he used to silence complaints, the metrics manipulation. It's a pattern, and patterns are hard to excuse as one-time mistakes. He's going to fight it. Of course he is. People like Mark always fight it. They lawyer up. They claim selective enforcement. They threaten wrongful termination suits. It's going to get messy, David. And you need to be prepared for that. Prepared for Mark to paint you as the villain. Prepared for him to potentially sue the company and name you specifically. Prepared for this to get a lot worse before it gets better. And Elena, how do I prepare for losing my wife over this? I don't know, Richard said quietly. That part, you're on your own. We sat in shared silence for a moment, the kind of silence that exists between people who understand that some problems don't have solutions, just consequences you have to learn to live with. Go home, Richard said finally. Or don't. But either way, get some sleep. Tomorrow we deal with your promotion and what your actual role should be going forward. Tonight, you just survive. He hung up, and I was alone again with my terrible coffee and my phone full of messages I didn't want to read. But I read them anyway. More texts from colleagues. A long message from Marcus detailing what he'd heard through the office grapevine. That security had escorted Mark out, that people were being called into HR for interviews, that there was talk of a criminal investigation into potential fraud. I didn't know if that last part was true or just rumor, but it sent a chill down my spine either way. A text from my mother, who somehow always knew when something was wrong. Call me when you can. Love you. A text from Mark's wife, Sarah, sent to both me and Elena in a group chat. I don't know what happened today, but this is tearing our family apart. Can we please all meet tomorrow and talk about this like adults? For the sake of the kids, if nothing else. The kids. Mark and Sarah had 3, 2 in middle school, 1 in high school. Kids who were going to wake up tomorrow to a father who'd been suspended from his job, possibly fired, maybe even facing legal consequences. Kids who went to school with our kids, who played on the same sports teams, who'd grown up together at family barbecues and holiday dinners and birthday parties. This wasn't just about Mark and me. It never had been. It was about the blast radius of his choices, the ripples spreading outward to touch everyone connected to him. Another text from Elena. Sarah wants us to meet tomorrow. I told her maybe. I don't know if I can sit in the same room with both of you right now. I understand, I typed back. Do you? Because I don't. I don't understand any of this. I don't understand how my husband and my brother can both be telling me completely different stories about the same events. I don't understand how I'm supposed to choose between you. I don't understand how this became my problem to solve. It's not your problem to solve. It's mine and Mark's. It stopped being just yours and Mark's the moment it involved my family, our family. The kids are asking questions, David. Emma heard me on the phone with Sarah, and now she's worried that Uncle Mark is in trouble. How do I explain this to a 10-year-old? I didn't have an answer for that, didn't know how to compress betrayal and investigation and family loyalty into terms a child could understand. Tell her the truth, I typed. Age-appropriate truth, but truth. Uncle Mark made some mistakes at work, and he's facing consequences. That's it. That's it? That makes it sound so simple. Maybe it should be simple. Maybe we've been making it complicated by pretending that family means you never hold each other accountable. No response. I'd probably pushed too hard, said too much. But I was tired of careful words and diplomatic silences. Tired of pretending that Mark's dysfunction was something we all just had to accept because that's what families do. I left cash on the table for Donna, enough to cover the coffee and a generous tip for her small kindness, and walked out into the parking lot. The night had turned cold, autumn finally asserting itself after weeks of lingering summer heat. I could see my breath in the glow of the streetlights. My phone rang. Elena. "Come home," she said when I answered. "We need to talk, and I can't do it over text." "Are you sure?" "No, but come anyway." I drove back through streets that looked different at night, familiar landmarks transformed by darkness into something almost foreign. The house was lit up when I pulled into the driveway, every window glowing, like Elena couldn't stand to be surrounded by shadows. She opened the door before I could get my keys out, still in that blue dress, but she'd taken off her heels and her makeup was smudged where she'd been crying. "The kids are asleep," she said by way of greeting. "We have to keep our voices down." I followed her to the kitchen. She'd made tea, her ritual for processing difficult things, the muscle memory of comfort. She poured 2 cups, and we sat at the same table where we'd sat hours ago when this conversation had first started. "I talked to Mark again," she said. "After you left. Really talked to him. Asked him direct questions and told him I needed honest answers. And he couldn't give them to me. Every question I asked, he deflected. Blamed you, blamed Richard, blamed company politics. But he couldn't actually defend his decisions. Couldn't explain the Morrison contracts, or why he didn't tell anyone he was firing you or any of it." She wrapped her hands around her mug, seeking warmth. "He's my brother," she continued, "and I love him. But I think," her voice cracked, "I think you might be right. I think he's been lying to me. Maybe to himself too, and I don't know how to reconcile the Mark I grew up with, the one who protected me and supported me, with the Mark who would do the things you're describing." "People can be both," I said quietly. "Good brother, bad boss. It's not mutually exclusive. But which one is real? Both, and neither. People are complicated, Elena. They contain multitudes, even when those multitudes contradict each other." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the question forming before she asked it. "Did you know about the audit before today?" "No. I swear to you, I found out the same time Mark did." "But you knew something was wrong, with his management, with the contracts." "Yes. And you didn't tell me. Would you have believed me?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, "No, I wouldn't have." And there it was, the truth we'd both been avoiding. The crack in our foundation that had been there long before today, just waiting for enough pressure to make it visible. "So where does that leave us?" I asked. Elena took a sip of her tea, set it down carefully, met my eyes. "I don't know," she said, but I think we're about to find out. I didn't sleep. Elena and I talked until 3 in the morning, circling the same questions without finding answers, then retreated to opposite sides of our bed, like boxers to neutral corners. She fell asleep eventually, her breathing evening out into the rhythm I'd memorized over 15 years. I just stared at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as the occasional car passed on the street outside, its headlights painting temporary constellations across the plaster. At 5:47, I gave up pretending and got out of bed. The house was silent in the way houses are before dawn, not peaceful exactly, but suspended, holding its breath. I made coffee in the dark, not wanting to wake anyone, and sat at the kitchen table watching the sky gradually lighten from black to navy to that peculiar gray that comes just before sunrise. My phone sat in front of me, charging. I'd plugged it in around 2, after Elena had finally fallen asleep and had been studiously ignoring the constant pulse of notifications. But now, in the pre-dawn quiet with nothing else to occupy my mind, I unlocked it and started reading. 68 new messages since I'd last checked. The number felt absurd, like I'd somehow become the center of a story I didn't want to be in. Most were variations on themes I'd already seen: support from colleagues, curiosity from acquaintances, a few carefully worded questions from people trying to figure out which side they should be on. But 3 messages stood out. The first was from Patricia Okonkwo in HR, sent at 11:47 p.m. David, I know it's late, but I wanted to give you advance notice. We're scheduling interviews with everyone in regional operations starting tomorrow. Today, technically. You'll need to meet with our legal team at 2 p.m. Mandatory. Bring any documentation you have regarding your interactions with Mark over the past 2 years. Performance reviews, emails, meeting notes, anything relevant. The second was from an unknown number, sent at 1:23 a.m. This is Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 News. We're investigating allegations of misconduct at your company and would like to speak with you. Please call me at your earliest convenience. The media, of course. Someone had leaked the story, probably one of the people who'd been interviewed yesterday, or maybe someone who'd overheard something in the office. Once reporters got wind of executive suspicion and internal investigations, it was only a matter of time before this became public. The third message was from Mark, sent at 4:15 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Keep thinking about when you first joined the company. Remember how nervous you were? How I spent 3 months training you, vouching for you, making sure you didn't get eaten alive by the politics. I didn't have to do that. Could have let you sink or swim on your own, but I didn't because you were family, because that meant something to me. I guess it didn't mean the same thing to you. I read it 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. Anger first, at the manipulation, the guilt trip, the complete refusal to acknowledge his own actions. Then sadness, because he was right about those early days, about how he'd helped me when I was drowning. And finally, something like grief for the relationship we'd had or thought we'd had before it all turned to ash. I started typing a response 6 different times and deleted it 6 different times. What could I say that wouldn't make things worse? What words existed that could bridge the gap between his version of reality and mine? Eventually, I settled on, I remember. I was grateful then, and I'm still grateful now for the opportunity you gave me. But gratitude doesn't mean ignoring when someone crosses ethical lines. I hope you can understand that someday. I didn't send it, just saved it in drafts, another message that would probably never be delivered. The coffee maker beeped. I poured a cup and carried it to the window, watching the neighborhood wake up. Lights coming on in other houses, people retrieving newspapers, loading kids into cars for early morning sports practices, starting their normal days full of normal problems. You're up early. I turned to find Elena in the doorway, wearing my old college sweatshirt and pajama pants, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted. Couldn't sleep, I said. Me either. Not really. She poured her own coffee, added cream and sugar the way she always did, and joined me at the window. What time do you have to be at the office? Meeting with Richard at 9, then HR and legal at 2. They're interviewing everyone? Apparently. They're going to ask me about you, about Mark, about family dynamics. I hadn't thought about that. Hadn't considered that Elena would be pulled into this officially, forced to give testimony about relationships she was still trying to understand herself. You have to tell them the truth, I said. Whatever that is, even if it makes me look bad. What if the truth is that I don't know who to believe anymore? I didn't have an answer for that. We stood in silence, drinking our coffee, watching the sun finally break the horizon and paint everything gold. It was going to be a beautiful day, meteorologically speaking, crisp and clear with temperatures in the low 60s, the kind of fall day that usually made me grateful to be alive. Today, it just felt like irony. The kids are going to have questions, Elena said. Emma already asked me last night why I was upset. I told her it was grown-up stuff, but she's too smart for that. She knows something's wrong. What do you want to tell them? The truth, some version of it anyway. That Uncle Mark made mistakes at work and there are consequences. That you didn't do anything wrong. That families sometimes have conflicts, but we still love each other. Do we? I asked quietly. Still love each other? Elena looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted but clear. I don't know how not to love him. He's my brother. But I'm also really angry at him right now, and confused, and disappointed. Can all of those things be true at the same time? Yes, I said. That's kind of the definition of family, isn't it? Loving people even when they disappoint you. Is it also the definition of being an enabler? Because Sarah called me at midnight, crying, saying I needed to stand by Mark, support him unconditionally, believe him over you because blood is thicker than water. She shook her head. But what if his blood is poison right now? What if supporting him means supporting behavior that's wrong? Then you don't support the behavior, but you can still support the person underneath it. How? How do I separate those things? I thought about Richard's story about his brother, about choosing what's right over what's easy, about how enabling dysfunction doesn't help anyone, no matter how much it might feel like loyalty. You hold him accountable, I said. You tell him you love him, but you can't defend his choices. You offer support for getting better, not for staying broken, and you accept that he might hate you for it. He already hates me, or he will when he realizes I'm not going to back him up unconditionally. Her voice cracked. Sarah said I was choosing you over my own brother, that I was betraying our family. Are you choosing me? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm choosing what's right. I hope that's the same thing as choosing you, but I honestly don't know anymore. Footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in the doorway, 10 years old and already too perceptive for her own good, still in her pajamas with her hair sticking up at odd angles. Why are you both awake so early? She asked, looking between us with the particular suspicion children develop when they sense their parents are keeping secrets. Couldn't sleep, sweetheart, Elena said, her voice shifting into mom mode, steadier and warmer. Want some breakfast? Are you and Dad fighting? The question hung in the air. Elena and I exchanged glances. Not fighting, I said carefully, just working through some complicated grown-up stuff. Is it about Uncle Mark? I heard you on the phone last night. Of course she had. Our house wasn't that big, and Emma had inherited her mother's tendency to be a light sleeper. Elena knelt down to Emma's level. Uncle Mark is having some problems at work. It's serious, and it's affecting our family, and Dad and I are trying to figure out how to handle it. But it's not your problem to worry about, okay? Is Uncle Mark in trouble? Yes, I said, because lying to her seemed worse than age-appropriate honesty. He made some decisions at work that weren't good choices, and now he's facing consequences. Did you get him in trouble? Emma asked me directly. Aunt Sarah said, What did Aunt Sarah say? Elena's voice had an edge now. She called last night while you were in the shower. I answered your phone because I thought it might be important. She said Dad was trying to take Uncle Mark's job and that we should be ashamed of him. Elena's face went white, then red. She said that to you, a 10-year-old? She thought I was you at first. Then when she realized it was me, she said, You're old enough to know what kind of man your father is, and then you came out of the shower and I hung up. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Sarah had been upset, I understood that. But dragging our daughter into this, trying to poison her against me, that crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. Emma, I said carefully, I need you to listen to me. What happened with Uncle Mark is complicated, but I didn't do anything to hurt him on purpose. Sometimes in business, people have to make hard choices about what's right, even when it affects people we care about. I made those kinds of choices. Uncle Mark made different kinds of choices. And now, we're all dealing with the consequences. But are you a bad person? Her eyes were filling with tears. Aunt Sarah said, Your father is a good person, Elena interrupted firmly. And we don't let other people, even family members, tell us what to think about the people we love. You judge people by what you know about them, not by what someone else says. What do you know about your dad? Emma thought about it. He helps me with my math homework even when he's tired. He never forgets my birthday. He makes bad jokes at breakfast. She smiled slightly. He teaches me things. Then that's who he is, Elena said. Not what Aunt Sarah says, not what anyone says, just what you know. Okay? Emma nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering. Once a seed like that gets planted in a child's mind, it's almost impossible to uproot completely. Go get dressed, Elena told her. I'll make pancakes. After Emma disappeared upstairs, Elena turned to me. I'm calling Sarah. Elena, no, I don't care how upset she is or how much she's hurting. She doesn't get to use our child as a weapon. She doesn't get to poison Emma against you because she's angry about Mark's choices. She grabbed her phone and walked out onto the back porch. Through the window, I could see her pacing, her free hand gesturing sharply as she talked. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Anger. Controlled, but barely. She came back in 3 minutes later. What did she say? I asked. She apologized. Sort of. Said she was upset and not thinking clearly. But she also said that I needed to remember where my loyalties should be, and that she hoped I could live with myself for choosing my husband over my brother. Elena's laugh was bitter. Like, it's that simple. Like there are only two sides, and I have to pick one. Maybe in her mind there are only two sides. Then her mind is wrong. She poured herself more coffee with shaking hands. I'm going with you. Where? To your meeting with Richard. I want to hear his side of this. I want to understand what actually happened, not filtered through Mark's version or your version or anyone else's version. I want to sit in that room and hear the facts. I don't think they'll let you. Then they can tell me no. But I'm asking. I have a right to know why my family is imploding. I couldn't argue with that logic. At 8:47, we were in the car heading downtown. Elena had insisted on driving, saying she needed something to control. I didn't argue, just sat in the passenger seat and watched the city wake up around us, the usual morning rush of people heading to job and lives, and purposes that didn't include family destruction. My phone buzzed. Richard, are you coming alone? Elena's with me. She wants to sit in on the meeting. That's irregular, but I understand. I'll allow it. See you at 9. We parked in the executive garage. Richard had given me his spare access code years ago, one of many small privileges that had come with our working relationship. Elena looked around at the reserved spaces, the pristine concrete, the elevator that led directly to the executive floor without having to go through the main lobby. You park here, she asked. Sometimes, when I have early meetings with Richard. You never mentioned that. It didn't seem important. She looked at me. What else didn't seem important that I should probably know about? A lot, apparently. But Elena, I wasn't hiding things to deceive you. I was just living separate parts of my life separately. Work was work. Home was home. I didn't think you needed to know about every meeting or parking space or professional relationship, even when those professional relationships were more significant than my brother realized, even when they might explain why you had more protection and power than he thought you did. She was right. I'd compartmentalized to the point of creating blind spots for myself, for Elena, for everyone who thought they understood my position in the company. The elevator opened directly into Margaret's domain. She looked up, saw Elena, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Mrs. Chen," she said politely, "Richard is expecting both of you. Go ahead in." The executive conference room looked different in morning light, less intimidating somehow, or maybe I was just less intimidated after everything that had happened yesterday. Richard stood at the window, same position as before, looking out at the city like he was contemplating chess moves only he could see. He turned when we entered, extended his hand to Elena. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming. I imagine this is difficult. You can call me Elena. And yes, it's difficult, but I need to understand what happened. Not the corporate version, the real version." Richard gestured to the chairs. We all sat. "The real version," he said, "is that your brother spent the last 2 years building a system that benefited him at the expense of this company and the people who work for it. And yesterday, when that system started to collapse, he tried to eliminate the person whose competence made his incompetence impossible to ignore." Elena flinched but didn't interrupt. "I'm going to show you something," Richard continued, pulling out his tablet. "Documents, emails, contracts, the evidence our audit team has compiled. You have no obligation to look at it. You have every right to walk out of here and choose to believe your brother's version of events. But if you want the real version, the truth backed by documentation, it's here." He slid the tablet across the table. Elena looked at it like it might bite her. Then, slowly, she picked it up and started reading. I watched her face as she scrolled through the evidence. Watched the denial give way to confusion, confusion give way to understanding, understanding give way to something that looked like grief. After 20 minutes, she set the tablet down. "He really did this," she whispered. "All of it." "Yes," Richard said gently. "And David," she turned to me, "you really didn't know about the audit until yesterday?" "I swear." She nodded slowly. Then to Richard, "What happens to him now? To Mark?" "That depends on several factors. What our investigation concludes. Whether he cooperates or fights. Whether any of this rises to criminal conduct or just civil liability. But at minimum, he'll be terminated. At maximum," Richard trailed off. "Prison?" Elena's voice was barely audible. "It's possible, not probable, but possible. If the Morrison contracts involved kickbacks or fraudulent billing, that's fraud. We're not there yet. But it's a possibility we have to consider." Elena stood abruptly, walked to the window, looked out at the same city her brother had probably looked at from the same room, back when he thought he was untouchable. "I need to call my parents," she said. "They're going to hear about this, and it should come from me." "Of course," Richard said. Elena looked at me. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between the truth and our marriage. I'm sorry," her voice broke. "I'm sorry my brother put us all in this position." I stood, crossed to her, pulled her into my arms. She held on tight, and I felt her tears soak through my shirt. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, knowing it was a lie, knowing it might never be okay again, but saying it anyway because sometimes lies are kinder than truth. No, she said against my chest. It's not, but maybe we'll survive it anyway. The HR conference room was smaller than the executive suite, more intimate, and somehow more threatening because of it. Patricia Okonkwo sat across from me with a legal pad, a recording device, and an expression of professional neutrality that probably took years to perfect. Next to her was James Whitmore, the COO, and someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a briefcase that looked expensive enough to contain either salvation or destruction. "David, this is Catherine Mills," Patricia said. "She's external counsel we've brought in to ensure the investigation maintains proper independence. Everything we discuss today is confidential and protected by attorney-client privilege. Do you understand?" "Yes," Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear about what this is and isn't. This is not a criminal investigation. We're not law enforcement. But if we discover evidence of criminal conduct, we are obligated to report it to appropriate authorities. Your cooperation today is voluntary but strongly encouraged. You may have your own attorney present if you wish." "Do I need one?" "That's your decision. But based on what we know so far, you're a witness, not a subject. We're trying to understand what happened, not build a case against you." I thought about it, about the cost of lawyers, the optics of lawyering up, the implication that I had something to hide. "I'll answer your questions." Patricia pressed record on the device, stated the date, time, and who was present, then nodded to Catherine. "Let's start with your relationship with Mark Castellano," Catherine said. "How long have you known him?" 16 years. We met when I started dating his sister, Elena. Married 15 years ago." "And he hired you 13 years ago?" "Yes. I'd been working at a small consulting firm that went under. We had a baby on the way, a mortgage we were struggling with. Mark offered me a position in his department, entry level, but it was stable employment with benefits." "Did you feel obligated to him for that?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes, I was grateful. He took a chance on me when I was desperate. I felt like I owed him." "How did that obligation affect your work relationship?" "For the first few years, I tried to prove I deserved the opportunity. Worked harder than everyone else. Took on projects no one wanted. Stayed late. Came in early. I wanted him to know he'd made the right choice." "And did he acknowledge that? Recognize your contributions?" "Sometimes. He'd praise me in private, but rarely in public. I figured that was just his management style. Keep expectations high, recognition minimal." Catherine made a note. "When did things start to change?" "About 5 years ago. I'd worked my way up to a senior position. I was managing a team, handling major client accounts. I'd become valuable, not just to Mark's department, but to the company. And I started to notice inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The way Mark reported numbers. We'd have a challenging quarter, miss some targets, but somehow the final reports would look better than reality. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding the accounting, but then I started keeping my own records, comparing what I knew our actual performance was versus what was being reported upward." "Did you confront him about this?" "Once, about 3 years ago. I asked him why the Q2 numbers he'd presented to executives didn't match the internal numbers I had. He said I didn't understand the full picture, that there were adjustments and allocations I wasn't aware of, that it was above my pay grade." "How did you respond?" "I let it go. Told myself he must know something I didn't, that I was overstepping by questioning him." I paused. Looking back, that was probably when I should have escalated. But he was family. He was my boss, and I was still grateful. James Whitmore spoke for the first time. "When did you first have contact with Richard Chen about these concerns?" I never directly raised concerns about Mark to Richard, but Richard and I had been working together on special projects since the Meridian Initiative 7 years ago. He'd pull me in for complex technical challenges, strategy sessions, things that required deep knowledge of our operations. Did Mark know about this relationship? I assumed he did. I never hid it, but I also never advertised it. Richard and I would meet early mornings or late evenings, times when most people weren't around. Not because we were being secretive, but because those were the times that worked for both our schedules. Did you discuss Mark during these meetings? No, we discussed business problems, technical challenges, client needs. Mark's name might come up in context, like, this project falls under regional operations, but we weren't sitting around critiquing his management. Catherine consulted her notes. Let's talk about the Morrison contracts. When did you first become aware of them? About 18 months ago. Mark mentioned in a team meeting that we were bringing in Morrison and Associates for a consulting project. I didn't think much of it initially. When did it become concerning? After the third or fourth contract. I noticed they were all sole source awards, no competitive bidding, and the scope of work was always vague, strategic consulting or operational assessment, but the deliverables were minimal, reports that didn't seem to justify the cost. Did you raise this with anyone? I mentioned it to Marcus in IT, asked if he knew why we kept using the same firm. He said he'd heard Morrison was a friend of Mark's, but didn't know details. I also mentioned it to Elena. Your wife? What did she say? That Mark knew what he was doing, that I should trust his judgment. The memory stung more now than it had then. I dropped it after that. But you kept track of the contracts. I kept track of everything. It's my nature. I maintain detailed records of all department expenditures, vendor relationships, project outcomes. It wasn't specific to Morrison. It was just how I worked. Patricia leaned forward. Did you know Tyler Morrison was Harold Morrison's son? Not until yesterday. Mark mentioned he was hiring someone at 30% of my salary. Later, Marcus told me it was Tyler Morrison, fresh out of college. I put the names together and realized the connection. How did that make you feel? Angry, used. It confirmed what I'd started to suspect, that the Morrison contracts weren't about getting quality conwaiting. They were about something else, and that my firing was connected to it somehow. Catherine pulled out a document, slid it across the table. Have you seen this before? It was an email from Mark to Harold Morrison, dated 6 months ago. Harold, package received. Very generous, much appreciated. RE, your son's employment. I think we can make that work. Position should open up in Q4. We'll keep you posted. I read it twice. Felt something cold settle in my stomach. No, I've never seen this. What do you think it means? It looks like Harold Morrison gave Mark something, money probably, and Mark promised to create a position for Tyler, my position. You think Mark planned to fire you 6 months ago? I think he planned to get rid of me whenever it became convenient. The audit probably accelerated his timeline. If I was gone, replaced by someone unqualified and loyal to Morrison, there'd be one less person who might notice irregularities. James spoke again. The audit was initiated 2 months ago. We've interviewed 12 people so far from regional operations. Would you like to know what they told us? Yes. Every single one mentioned that your department was the highest performing unit, that you were respected, competent, fair. Several mentioned that Mark took credit for your successes in executive meetings. 3 mentioned that Mark had expressed concern about you becoming too independent or developing relationships above his level. James paused. 1 person, Jennifer Martinez in accounting, said you'd helped her document some irregularities in expense reporting that she was afraid to raise herself because Mark had retaliated against others who questioned him. Jennifer told you that? She's been documenting Mark's behavior for 8 months. She has emails, expense reports, with questionable charges, NDAs that were used to silence complaints. She was waiting for the right moment to come forward. Your firing gave her that moment. I hadn't known, hadn't realized that other people were seeing the same things I was, collecting the same evidence, waiting for someone else to be brave first. What kind of retaliation? I asked. Patricia answered. 3 employees who filed formal complaints about Mark's management were offered severance packages with end days attached. They were told if they didn't sign, their performance reviews would reflect poorly and they'd likely be terminated anyway. All 3 took the money and left quietly. I stopped, searching for words. That's not just bad management, that's systemic abuse. Yes, Catherine said simply, which is why this investigation has expanded beyond the Morrison contracts. We're now looking at Mark's entire tenure as regional director. Every hire, every firing, every contract, every complaint. It's a comprehensive review. How long will that take? Weeks, probably. Maybe months if we find additional issues that need investigation. She paused. David, I need to ask you something difficult. Did Mark ever approach you about falsifying records, manipulating data, or participating in any activities you considered unethical? No, he kept me separate from that. I think he knew I wouldn't go along with it. But you suspected? Yes. And you didn't report those suspicions? There it was, the question I'd been dreading. The one that made me complicit, even though I'd never actively participated. No, I said quietly. I didn't report them. I told myself I didn't have proof, that suspicions weren't enough, that I might be wrong, and if I was wrong, I'd damage my relationship with family for nothing. I met Catherine's eyes. I was a coward. I chose the easy path over the right path. And I'm sorry for that. The room was quiet. The recording device kept running, preserving my confession for posterity. Why are you being so honest? Catherine asked finally. You could downplay your knowledge, claim complete ignorance, distance yourself from everything. Because I'm tired of the lies, tired of the compartmentalization, tired of pretending that family loyalty is more important than integrity. I thought about Elena, about Emma, about the example I wanted to set versus the example I'd actually been setting. My daughter asked me this morning if I was a bad person, and I realized that if I keep choosing comfort over honesty, eventually the answer to that question will be yes. Patricia made a note. James nodded slightly, expression unreadable. Let's talk about yesterday, Catherine said. Walk me through the meeting where Mark fired you. I did. Conference room C, the manila folder, the 30%, the hour to pack, Mark's discomfort, and his careful corporate phrases that masked what he was really doing. How did you feel when he told you? Betrayed, angry, frightened. We have 2 kids, a mortgage. Elena doesn't work full-time. Being fired meant potential financial disaster. But more than that, it felt personal. Like 13 years of dedication meant nothing. Did you threaten him? Promise retaliation? No, I just told him I needed an hour to pack my things. That's it? No argument? What was there to argue about? He'd already made the decision. Fighting would just have been undignified. I smiled slightly. Besides, Richard called before I'd even finished packing. Did you tell Richard what happened? He asked where I was. I told him Mark had just fired me. He told me to come to the quarterly review anyway. Did you know what was going to happen at that review? I knew Richard was angry. I didn't know about the audit until Patricia presented the findings. That was as much a surprise to me as it was to Mark. Catherine consulted her notes again. Several people have described your presentation of the performance metrics as devastating and calculated to make Mark look incompetent. Do you agree with that characterization? The numbers were accurate. How they were interpreted is beyond my control. But you knew how they'd be interpreted. You knew that showing Mark's department was underperforming while your unit was thriving would raise questions. Yes. So you deliberately presented information in a way that damaged Mark's credibility. I deliberately presented the truth. If the truth damaged his credibility, that's because his credibility was built on sand. Catherine leaned back, studying me. You're an interesting case, David. You're clearly intelligent, clearly capable of strategic thinking, yet you claim you didn't anticipate this outcome, that you were just doing your job. I didn't say I didn't anticipate consequences. I said I didn't orchestrate them. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I sit, it looks like you positioned yourself perfectly to survive your own firing and trigger your boss's downfall, all while maintaining plausible deniability about your intentions. The accusation hung in the air. I thought about how to respond, how to defend myself without sounding defensive. You're right, I said finally. I did position myself, for years, by being competent, by building relationships based on merit, by documenting everything and maintaining standards that would withstand scrutiny. But I didn't do that to destroy Mark. I did it to protect myself from being destroyed. Turns out they're the same thing. Catherine smiled slightly. That's probably the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this entire investigation. She closed her folder. I think we're done here. Unless Patricia or James have additional questions. They both shook their heads. Patricia stopped the recording. Thank you, David. You've been very forthcoming. We may need to follow up as the investigation continues, but for now, you're free to go. I stood, legs unsteady. What happens next? To Mark? That's not something we can discuss, Catherine said. But I will tell you this. Your testimony today, combined with the documentation Jennifer provided and the other evidence we've gathered, paints a clear picture. What happens next will depend on how Mark chooses to respond to that picture. I walked out of the conference room into the hallway, found Elena sitting in the waiting area, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when she saw me. How did it go? She asked. I told them everything, things I probably shouldn't have. Things that might make me look complicit. Did you tell them the truth? Yes. Then you did the right thing. She stood, took my hand. I talked to my parents while you were in there. Told them what's happening. They want to have dinner tonight. All of us. Talk about how to handle this as a family. Including Mark? No, Mark's not invited. My father said, her voice caught. He said that Mark needs to face the consequences of his choices without the family running interference, that we've enabled him too long already. It was the first time Elena's father had ever said anything critical about Mark, the golden child, the successful son, the one who'd never disappointed anyone until he'd disappointed everyone at once. Okay, I said, dinner with your parents. I can do that. David, Elena squeezed my hand. Whatever happens next, we face it together. No more separate compartments, no more secrets. Agreed? Agreed. We walked out of the building together into afternoon sunlight that felt almost warm. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new revelations, new consequences. But for now, we had each other, and maybe that was enough. Elena's parents lived in a Victorian house on the edge of town, the kind of place that required constant maintenance and generated constant pride. Her father, Robert, had bought it 30 years ago when Mark was 5 and Elena was just a baby, back when the neighborhood was considered up and coming rather than established. Now the street was lined with mature oaks and restored homes, and the kind of quiet prosperity that came from decades of careful investment. I'd always felt slightly uncomfortable here, like I was performing in a play where everyone else had memorized their lines, and I was still reading from the script. Tonight, that feeling was magnified by the weight of everything unsaid, everything that was about to be said, everything that could never be unsaid once we started talking. Elena's mother, Patricia, not to be confused with Patricia from HR, though both shared the same capacity for controlled disappointment, answered the door. She hugged Elena tightly, held me at arm's length for a moment as if assessing damage, then pulled me in as well. Come in, she said. Your father's in the study. He's been on the phone all afternoon. With Mark? Elena asked. Patricia's expression flickered. Among others. There's wine in the kitchen. Pour yourself something. I think we're all going to need it. The house smelled like it always did. Lemon polish and old books, and something baking that would turn out to be too dry because Patricia had never quite mastered the oven, despite 40 years of trying. Family photos lined the hallway, a chronological record of birthdays and graduations and holidays. I noticed there were more photos of Mark than Elena, a disparity I'd never paid attention to before but couldn't ignore now. Mark in his high school football uniform, Mark at his college graduation, Mark at his wedding, standing tall and confident with Sarah beside him looking young and hopeful. Mark holding his firstborn, his face split by a grin that suggested nothing would ever go wrong. How many of those photos were lies? Not the moments themselves, but the narrative they constructed. The story of a golden child who excelled at everything, who made good choices, who deserved the adoration his parents heaped on him. Robert emerged from his study as we reached the kitchen. He was in his 70s now, retired from his law practice but still carrying himself with the particular authority that came from decades of arguing cases and winning. He'd always liked me, I thought, or at least respected me. But I'd never been Mark, and therefore I'd never quite measured up. Tonight, though, something was different in his expression. David, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. We shook. His grip was firm, deliberate, communicating something I couldn't quite decode. Let's sit, he said, gesturing to the dining room. Patricia's made roast chicken. It'll be ready in 20 minutes, which gives us time to discuss the situation before we eat. The situation. Such a bland term for family destruction. We settled around the dining table, the same table where we'd celebrated 15 years of holidays and birthdays and Sunday dinners. The same table where Mark had announced his promotion to regional director 5 years ago, beaming with pride while his parents toasted his success. The same table where, 3 months ago, he'd complained about dead weight in his department without naming names, though I'd known he meant me. Robert poured wine for everyone. Elena's hand shook slightly as she picked up her glass. Elena briefed us on the general situation, Robert began. But I'd like to hear it from you, David. What exactly happened? So I told him. Not the sanitized version, not the corporate-approved summary, but the whole truth. The years of suspected irregularities, the Morrison contracts, the firing, the quarterly review, the audit findings. My interview with legal. I left nothing out, including my own failures to speak up sooner, my own complicity through silence. Robert listened without interrupting, his lawyer's face revealing nothing. Patricia's face revealed everything: shock, denial, grief, anger cycling through in waves as she processed what I was telling her about her son. When I finished, the silence was profound. Mark called me this afternoon, Robert said finally. He told me a very different story. He said you'd been insubordinate for years, that you'd been going around him to Richard Chen, undermining his authority, that you'd manufactured evidence to get him fired because you wanted his position. He said the Morrison contracts were standard business practice and that the audit was politically motivated. And do you believe him? I asked quietly. Robert took a sip of wine, set the glass down carefully. I spent 40 years as a lawyer, David. I learned to recognize when people are telling the truth and when they're constructing a narrative to protect themselves. Mark was constructing a narrative. Patricia made a small sound, almost a whimper. But I needed to hear your version, Robert continued. Needed to assess whether you were constructing your own narrative. And I'll be honest, you're not blameless in this. You should have escalated your concerns earlier. You should have documented and reported instead of staying silent. I know. But Mark, Robert's voice hardened. Mark didn't just make mistakes. He made choices, deliberate, calculated choices to enrich himself and his friends at the company's expense, to silence people who questioned him, to create a system where his incompetence was masked by your competence. Those aren't mistakes. That's corruption. The word hung in the air like smoke. Corruption, not just bad judgment or poor management or ethical lapses. Corruption. "Robert, please," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "He's our son. There has to be an explanation, some context we're missing." "There's no context that makes this acceptable, Patricia." Robert's tone was gentle but firm. "Our son abused his position. He violated ethical standards and probably laws. And when he got caught, instead of taking responsibility, he tried to destroy the person who'd been covering for his inadequacies for years." "You don't know that. I do know that. I spent 3 hours this afternoon on the phone with colleagues who still practice corporate law. I had them review the audit summary Elena sent me. Patricia, this isn't ambiguous. This isn't a gray area. Mark is in serious legal jeopardy, and the best thing we can do for him, the only thing, is to stop making excuses and start pushing him toward accountability." Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "He's your son. How can you sit there and talk about him like he's just another case? Because treating him like a son instead of a person who broke the law is what enabled this in the first place." Robert's voice rose for the first time. "We did this, Patricia. We raised him to believe rules didn't apply to him. That charm and connections mattered more than competence and integrity. That family would always protect him from consequences. And now he's facing consequences we can't protect him from, and instead of helping him face them with dignity, you want to maintain the same delusions that created this mess." The silence that followed was devastating. I'd never heard Robert raise his voice to Patricia, had never seen him anything other than measured and controlled. Elena reached across the table, took her mother's hand. "Mom, I know this is hard, but Dad's right. We can't help Mark by pretending he didn't do anything wrong. He made mistakes," Patricia whispered. "Everyone makes mistakes." "Mistakes are accidental," I said quietly. "Sending an email to the wrong person is a mistake. Forgetting a meeting is a mistake. Systematically awarding contracts to a friend's company over the course of 18 months while manipulating performance metrics and silencing complaints, those aren't mistakes. Those are choices." Patricia pulled her hand away from Elena's. "You want me to abandon my son?" "No," Robert said. "We want you to help him face reality. The company is going to terminate him. That's certain. The only question is whether they'll pursue criminal charges or settle for civil penalties. If Mark fights this, claims he did nothing wrong, maintains his innocence, he's going to lose and the penalties will be severe. But if he cooperates, takes responsibility, shows genuine remorse, there's a chance he can minimize the damage." "You want him to plead guilty to crimes he didn't commit?" "I want him to admit to crimes he did commit." Robert's hand hit the table, rattling the wine glasses. "Patricia, I've read the evidence. I've seen the emails. Our son is guilty. The only question is whether he's guilty and repentant or guilty and defiant. One of those paths has a future. The other ends in prison." The word, prison, seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "Prison?" Patricia's voice was barely audible. "They can't. He wouldn't. If the Morrison contracts involved kickbacks or fraudulent billing, that's wire fraud. Federal offense. 5 to 10 years depending on the amounts involved." Robert's voice had shifted into lawyer mode, clinical and precise. "If he used company resources for personal gain, that's embezzlement. If he retaliated against whistleblowers, that's obstruction. The charges could stack up quickly. But you said if he cooperates, then maybe it doesn't go criminal. Maybe it stays civil. Maybe he pays fines and restitution and agrees never to work in corporate management again but stays out of prison. Maybe." Elena was crying silently, tears streaming down her face while she gripped her wine glass like it was the only solid thing in the room. I moved closer, put my arm around her. "What do we do?" Patricia asked. And for the first time, she sounded small, vulnerable, like a mother who'd just realized her child was in danger she couldn't fix. "We tell him the truth," Robert said. "We tell him that we love him, but we can't support his denial. We tell him to get the best criminal defense attorney money can buy. We tell him to cooperate fully with the investigation. We tell him to start making amends, starting with apologizing to David." "He'll never apologize to David," Patricia said. "He blames David for everything." "Then he'll go to prison," Robert said simply, "because that level of delusion won't survive cross-examination." The oven timer went off, absurdly cheerful in the heavy silence. Patricia stood mechanically and went to the kitchen. We heard her opening the oven, the clatter of dishes, then nothing for a long moment. Elena rose and followed her mother. Through the doorway, I could see them embracing, Patricia's shoulders shaking with sobs, Elena holding her the way you hold someone who's breaking. Robert looked at me across the table. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted. "This morning I was fired. This afternoon I helped destroy my brother-in-law's career. Tonight I'm sitting here listening to a lawyer explain how my wife's brother might go to prison. I don't think there's a word for how I'm holding up." "Survival," Robert said. "That's the word. You're surviving. Hour by hour, choice by choice. That's all any of us can do right now." "Elena's parents were supposed to be neutral," I said. "Switzerland, safe harbor for both sides." "There are no sides in this, David. There's just the truth and people's relationship to it. Mark is choosing denial. You're choosing acceptance. We're choosing to support the person who's choosing reality, even though it means confronting painful facts about our son." Patricia doesn't see it that way. Patricia needs time. She'll get there. Or she won't. But I can't sacrifice the truth to spare her feelings. I learned that lesson as a lawyer. Once you start bending reality to accommodate emotions, you lose the ability to function in the world as it actually is. Elena and Patricia returned, both red-eyed but composed. Patricia carried the chicken, placed it on the table with shaking hands. Elena brought vegetables and potatoes. We arranged food on plates in silence, the domestic ritual feeling surreal given everything we'd just discussed. "I talked to Sarah," Patricia said as we began eating. "She wants to meet, just the mothers. She thinks if we present a united front, we can convince you both to back off. Let Mark fight this without family being divided." "What did you tell her?" Robert asked. "That I'd think about it." Patricia looked at Elena. "Would that be so terrible? If we tried to keep the family together through this?" "The family is already divided, Mom," Elena said quietly. "Sarah thinks David orchestrated Mark's downfall. I think Mark orchestrated his own. We can't both be right. But we're still family." "Family doesn't mean pretending things are okay when they're not," Elena interrupted. "It doesn't mean protecting people from consequences they earned. And it doesn't mean asking David to apologize for telling the truth." "I'm not asking him to apologize. I'm asking for grace, for understanding that Mark is under tremendous stress and may have made some questionable decisions, but that doesn't make him a criminal." "Yes," Robert said firmly. "It does. That's exactly what it makes him. And the sooner everyone accepts that, the sooner we can start dealing with reality instead of fantasy." My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, then wished I hadn't. It was a news alert. Local executive suspended amid fraud investigation. The story was out. Someone had leaked it to the media, probably the same person who'd contacted me yesterday. I clicked through to the article, skimmed it quickly. A high-level executive at company name has been suspended pending investigation into alleged financial irregularities and contract fraud. Sources familiar with the matter indicate the investigation involves millions of dollars in questionable contracts and potential kickback schemes. The executive, whose name has not been officially released, is the brother-in-law of another company employee who reportedly blew the whistle on the alleged misconduct. "It's in the news," I said quietly. "They haven't named Mark yet, but they've identified him as my brother-in-law. It's only a matter of time. Elena read over my shoulder, went pale. The kids, they're going to see this. Their friends' parents will see this. We need to get ahead of it, Robert said. Control the narrative as much as possible. David, you should probably draft a statement. Nothing detailed, just confirming that you cooperated with an internal investigation and referring all questions to the company. And Mark? Patricia asked. What does he say? Nothing, Robert said. He lawyers up and says nothing. That's the only smart play at this point. My phone rang. Richard. I need to take this, I said, stepping away from the table into Robert's study. Have you seen the news? Richard asked without preamble. Just now. We're putting out an official statement in the morning. I wanted you to know before it goes public. We're confirming the investigation, but not naming Mark. However, we are announcing your promotion to regional director effective immediately. The words took a moment to register. What? You're taking over Mark's position. It's the cleanest solution, maintains continuity, rewards competence, sends a message that merit matters. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly, and you'll report directly to me rather than through the previous chain of command. Richard, I can't. The optics of this are terrible. It'll look like I orchestrated Mark's firing to take his job. Let me worry about optics. You worry about running the department effectively. Can you start Monday? Thought about Mark's reaction, about Sarah's accusations, about the family dinner from hell that would somehow get worse when they learned I was literally taking Mark's position. Yes, I said. I can start Monday. Good. We'll announce it Friday afternoon. Give you the weekend to prepare. David, this is going to get messy before it gets better. Media attention, probably legal discovery, potential testimony if charges are filed. Are you ready for that? I don't think anyone's ever ready for that. Fair point. But are you willing? I looked through the doorway at Elena, sitting with her parents at a table full of cooling food and warm grief. At the life we'd built together that was being stress-tested in ways we'd never anticipated. Yes, I said. I'm willing. I hung up and returned to the dining room. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. That was Richard Chen, I said. They're promoting me. I'm the new regional director. Patricia's face crumpled. Elena's eyes went wide. Robert nodded slowly as if he'd predicted this exact outcome. You're taking his job, Patricia whispered. You're literally taking his job. I'm taking a position that's vacant because its previous occupant is under investigation for fraud. Yes. Mark will never forgive you for this. Mark will never forgive me regardless. At least this way I can feed my family and fix the department he broke. Patricia stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. I can't do this. I can't sit here and... She looked at Elena with something like betrayal. And celebrate while my son loses everything. We're not celebrating, Mom, Elena said quietly. We're surviving. There's a difference. But Patricia was already walking away, disappearing into the house, leaving the 3 of us sitting among the ruins of a family dinner that had imploded exactly as predicted, just not in the ways anyone had imagined. Spring came early that year, arriving in mid-March with unseasonable warmth and cherry blossoms that bloomed 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I stood at the window of my new office, Mark's old office, though I'd redecorated completely, erasing every trace of his tenure, and watched the city wake up below me. 6th floor now, not 4th. Corner office with windows facing the skyline instead of the parking lot, the view that came with doing the right thing, though some days it felt more like the view from a battlefield where I'd survived but everyone else had casualties. My phone buzzed. Elena. Kids are at school. I'm heading to the lawyer's office. Should be done by noon. The lawyer's office. Even now, 6 months later, those words carried weight. Elena had been spending a lot of time with lawyers lately. Hers, mine, the company's, and occasionally the federal prosecutors who were building their case against Mark. because it had gone criminal. Despite Robert's best efforts, despite hiring the most expensive defense attorney money could buy, despite attempts to cooperate and minimize damage, the evidence was too clear, too extensive, too damning. Wire fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice. The indictment had come down 3 months ago, 14 counts, each one carrying potential prison time that added up to numbers we tried not to think about. "Good luck," I texted back. "Love you too." Those 3 words had become more precious over the past 6 months. There had been times, dark times, usually around 3 in the morning, when neither of us could sleep, when I'd wondered if our marriage would survive the fallout. If the stress of having her husband promoted into her brother's position, while her brother faced federal prosecution, would be too much. If family loyalty would eventually win out over marital commitment. But Elena had surprised me, or maybe she'd surprised herself. She'd chosen truth over comfort, accountability over enabling, and somehow, in the process of watching her brother's life implode, our marriage had grown stronger. Not easier, not painless, but stronger in the way things become stronger when they're stress-tested and don't break. A knock on my door, Marcus from IT, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Morning briefing?" he asked. "Come in." Marcus had become my unofficial second-in-command over the past 6 months. When I'd taken over the department, I'd needed people I could trust, people who valued competence over politics. Marcus had been first on that list. Now he was my VP of operations, a promotion he'd earned by being exactly as good as I'd always known he was. "3 things," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "First, the Morrison contracts have all been terminated, and we're in litigation to recover the overpayments. Company lawyers think we'll get back about 60%. Better than nothing. Second, Jennifer Martinez wants to meet with you. She's nervous about testifying at Mark's trial, wants to know what to expect." I'd been expecting this. Jennifer had been subpoenaed by the prosecution as a key witness. Her documentation of Mark's expense irregularities and the NDA's used to silence complaints was crucial to proving the pattern of corruption. But testifying meant facing Mark in court, facing cross-examination designed to discredit her, facing the family connections that made this personal in ways normal criminal trials weren't. "Tell her I'll meet with her this afternoon, and that she should talk to the victim advocate the prosecutor's office assigned. They're good at preparing witnesses." "Third," Marcus said, "we got the Q1 performance metrics. Want the good news or the amazing news?" "Start with good." "Revenue up 18% over last year, costs down 12%, employee retention at 91% across the entire division." "And the amazing news?" "Richard wants to expand our model to the other regional divisions. Essentially, you'd be overseeing a national rollout of the management practices you've implemented here. It would mean another promotion, Senior Vice President of Regional Operations." I sat back, processing. 6 months ago, I'd been fired. Now I was being considered for a position 3 levels above where I'd been. It felt surreal, like I'd wandered into someone else's career trajectory. "What's the catch?" I asked. "There's always a catch with you," Marcus grinned. "The catch is it would require some travel, 10 to 15%, visiting other regions, training their leadership, implementing systems. Doable, but not trivial given everything else on your plate." Everything else on my plate. He meant the trial, scheduled to start in 2 months. I was on the witness list, both prosecution and defense. The prosecution wanted me to testify about Mark's management practices and my firing. The defense wanted to paint me as a vindictive employee who'd orchestrated Mark's downfall to steal his job. Both narratives were partially true, which made preparing testimony complicated. "I'll think about it," I said. "Talk to Elena. See if we can make the travel work with the kids' schedules and everything else." Everything else. Such a bland phrase for family implosion. After Marcus left, I pulled up my email, scrolled through the usual morning deluge, until I found the one I'd been half dreading, half expecting. From Robert Morrison, Elena's father. Subject, Mark update. David, I wanted to update you before you heard it elsewhere. Mark's attorney has approached the prosecutors about a plea deal. If accepted, Mark would plead guilty to 6 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of obstruction in exchange for dropping the other charges. Recommended sentence would be 36 to 48 months, with possibility of early release after 24 months for good behavior. He's resisting, still believes he can win at trial, or at least create enough reasonable doubt for a hung jury. Sarah is supporting this delusion. Patricia is struggling. She wants to believe him but is starting to accept reality. Mark has requested a meeting with you. His attorney thinks a conversation might help him understand the strength of the prosecution's case. I think it's a terrible idea and told him so, but he wanted me to ask anyway. Let me know your thoughts. Robert. A meeting with Mark. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I was fired. Hadn't been in the same room since that quarterly review 6 months ago. He'd sent texts I'd blocked, left voicemails I'd deleted, tried to reach me through Elena, who'd refused to be a messenger for his anger. And now, he wanted to meet. To what? Convince me to lie for him? Threaten me? Beg for mercy I didn't have the power to give? I started typing a response. Deleted it. Started again. Robert, I don't think a meeting would be productive. Anything Mark wants to say to me should go through proper legal channels. If the prosecutors want me to help convince him to take the plea deal, they should formally request it. But between us, 36 to 48 months is better than the 15 to 20 years he's facing if convicted on all counts at trial. He should take the deal. David, I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My phone rang immediately. Robert, you're right that a meeting is a bad idea, he said without preamble. But I'm asking anyway, not for Mark's sake, for Elena's, for Patricia's, for the grandchildren who are going to have to live with whatever narrative emerges from this. What narrative do you want, Robert? The one where I meet with Mark and somehow that makes everything okay? Where I absolve him of responsibility and we all pretend this was just a misunderstanding? No. The narrative where you did everything possible to encourage him toward the right path. Where, years from now, when the kids ask what happened, we can honestly say that you tried to help him make the choice that would minimize harm. I closed my eyes, rubbed my temples. When and where? His attorney's office. Tomorrow at 2, I'll be there. His attorney will be there. It'll be professional, structured, short. You say your piece about the evidence against him. You encourage him to take the deal. You leave. That's it. And if he doesn't listen, then at least we tried. The law offices of Weinstein and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown building that screamed expensive. Mark's defense was costing somewhere north of $500,000, money his parents had liquidated retirement accounts to provide, another casualty of his choices. Robert met me in the lobby. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, the stress carving new lines around his eyes and mouth. Thank you for coming, he said. I'm not doing this for Mark. I know. We rode the elevator in silence, got off on the 14th floor where a receptionist who probably cost more per hour than most people made in a day directed us to a conference room. Mark was already there. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his suit hanging loose on a frame that used to be solid. His hair was grayer. His face was haggard, carrying the particular exhaustion that comes from months of stress and poor sleep, and the knowledge that your entire life is imploding. His attorney, Gerald Weinstein, stood as we entered, shook hands with professional courtesy that felt obscene given the circumstances. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, he said. I know it's unusual, but I believe it serves everyone's interest to have an honest conversation about the case and the options available. Mark stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Hatred, betrayal, fear, all of the above. We sat. The conference table between us felt both too wide and not wide enough. David, Weinstein began, I've explained to Mark the strength of the prosecution's case against him, the documentary evidence, the witness testimony, the pattern of conduct that will be extremely difficult to explain away as mere mistakes or judgment errors. But I think it would be helpful if he heard from you directly about what you observed and what you'll testify to if this goes to trial. So I told him, calmly, clinically, without emotion, the Morrison contracts, the performance metric manipulation, the NDAs, the retaliation against employees who questioned him, my own firing, the evidence I'd provided to investigators, the testimony I'd given that had helped build the case against him. Mark's face went through a series of transformations as I spoke: denial, anger, something that might have been recognition, and finally something that looked almost like despair. "You destroyed me," he said when I finished. "I gave you a job, a career, a chance when you had nothing, and you destroyed me." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just refused to help you cover it up. You went to Richard Chen behind my back. I had a professional relationship with Richard that predated your paranoia about it. I never badmouthed you to him, never plotted against you. I just did my job well, which apparently made you look bad by comparison. You could have warned me about the audit, about the investigation. You could have given me a chance to fix things before they went nuclear. I didn't know about the audit until the same day you did, and even if I had known earlier, Mark, there was nothing to fix. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices, deliberate, repeated choices to enrich yourself and your friends at the company's expense. No warning would have changed that pattern." "I made you." Mark's voice rose. "You were nothing without me, a failed consultant with a pregnant wife and bills you couldn't pay. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" "You gave me a job," I corrected, "which I performed excellently for 13 years, generating millions in revenue and making you look competent to executives who would have otherwise noticed you weren't. I repaid that job with loyalty and hard work until you tried to fire me to cover your crimes. We're even." Weinstein held up a hand. "Gentlemen, this isn't productive. David, I asked you here for a specific purpose. Would you mind explaining to Mark what testimony you expect to give if this goes to trial?" So I did. Every conversation where Mark had deflected concerns about the Morrison contracts. Every meeting where he'd taken credit for work my team had done. Every observation of his management practices that showed a pattern of putting personal benefit above company interests. The timeline of my firing and how it correlated with the audit investigation. The emails Jennifer had provided showing Mark knew about complaints and chose to silence them with money rather than address them. By the time I finished, Mark's face was ashen. "The prosecution has 47 witnesses prepared to testify," Weinstein said gently. "David is just one of them, and his testimony is among the least damaging because he can only speak to what he personally observed. The forensic accountants who've traced the money flows, the former employees who documented your retaliation, the emails you thought were deleted but IT recovered, that's the evidence that will convict you." "So what am I supposed to do?" Mark's voice broke. "Just give up, plead guilty to crimes, and go to prison?" "You plead guilty to the crimes you committed," I said. "Take the deal that gives you 36 months instead of 15 years. Use that time to get therapy, figure out how you became this person, and plan for the life you'll have afterward. Because, Mark, you did this. All of it. And the only question now is whether you face it with some dignity, or whether you force your family to sit through a trial where every terrible choice you made gets aired in public." "Elena," Mark said suddenly, "does she hate me?" The question caught me off guard. "No, she's heartbroken, disappointed, angry. But she doesn't hate you. She just can't pretend you didn't do what you did. And my kids, Sarah told them I'm innocent, that I'm being framed. Then Sarah is setting them up for devastation when you're convicted," Robert interrupted. "Mark, I've been a lawyer for 40 years. I've seen hundreds of cases like yours. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You will be convicted if this goes to trial. The only question is how many counts and how long the sentence. The plea deal is mercy you don't deserve, but should take anyway." Mark put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. I realized he was crying, silent, terrible sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said finally. "The Morrison contracts. Harold was a friend. He needed the work. It started as just helping a friend, and then it became expected. And the money was good. And I told myself everyone does this kind of thing, that it's just how business works. It's not how business works," I said. "It's how corruption works, and deep down you knew that. You just chose not to care." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Mark looked up, met my eyes. "If I take the deal," he said, "will you tell Elena I'm sorry, that I know I was wrong, that I wish I could go back and make different choices? Tell her yourself. Write her a letter. Call her. She'll listen. She might not forgive you right away, but she'll listen. Will you forgive me?" I thought about that question. About 13 years of working for him, of family dinners and holidays, and the complicated web of obligation and resentment and gratitude that had defined our relationship. "Someday," I said. "Not today. Maybe not for a long time. But someday, when you've served your sentence and done the work to become someone different than who you are now, maybe then." It wasn't absolution, but it was honest, and honesty was the only thing I had left to give him. 3 weeks later, Mark took the plea deal. 42 months in federal prison, restitution of $2.3 million, permanent ban from serving in corporate management positions. The sentencing hearing was brief, clinical, devastating. Sarah didn't attend. Patricia did, holding Elena's hand while the judge outlined the terms of her son's punishment for choices that had destroyed multiple lives, including his own. I didn't attend. I was at the office, running the department Mark had broken and I'd rebuilt, preparing for the promotion that would take me national, living the life that came after survival, when you've made it through the fire and have to figure out what to do with the person the flames didn't destroy. That evening, Elena came home and found me in the backyard, watching the kids play on the swing set we'd finally fixed. She wrapped her arms around me from behind, rested her head against my shoulder. "It's over," she said. "Is it?" "The legal part, the trial threat, the uncertainty, that's over. Now we just have to figure out how to live with what's left." I turned to face her. "What is left?" She smiled, sad but genuine. "Us, the kids, jobs we're good at, a house that needs repainting, parents who are learning to hold their children accountable, a marriage that survived because we chose truth over comfort." She paused. "It's not nothing, David." "No," I agreed. "It's not nothing." We stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, watching our children play in the wreckage of a family that would never be what it was but might someday become something better. I'd been fired 6 months ago for being too competent, too honest, too unwilling to play the games that advancement supposedly required. And in refusing to play those games, in choosing integrity over comfort, I'd somehow ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because I'd destroyed Mark, but because I'd refused to be destroyed with him. The difference was subtle but profound. And it was everything. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, unexpected and brief. "David, I was released yesterday, 8 months early for good behavior. I wanted you to know that I used my time inside to get therapy, to really examine the choices I made and why I made them. I'm not asking for forgiveness or friendship, just acknowledgement that I'm trying to become someone worth forgiving. Mark, I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Elena with a single question. What do you think? Her response came 15 minutes later. I think people can change. I think we should give him the chance to prove it, from a distance, with boundaries. but a chance. So I wrote back, "Mark, I'm glad you're using this time for growth. The path forward won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. When you're ready, when you've done the work, we can talk, not as family necessarily, but as two people who survived the same disaster and came out the other side. Good luck, David." I hit send and turned back to the presentation I was preparing for the National Leadership Summit. Senior Vice President now, overseeing 6 regions, implementing the same principles that had saved one broken department: competence over politics, truth over comfort, accountability over enabling. The work Mark had started by firing me had led to the career I'd always deserved, but never thought to ask for, not because I'd destroyed him, but because I'd refused to let his destruction take me down too. Some days I felt guilty about that. Most days I just felt grateful. The phone rang. "Richard, ready for the board presentation next week?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good, because I'm recommending you for COO when James retires next year. Thought you should have advance notice. COO, Chief Operating Officer, second only to the CEO, the position I'd never imagined, never sought, never thought possible for someone who'd started as an entry-level employee with nothing but desperation and a pregnant wife. Richard, you've earned it, David, not through politics or connections or family ties, through competence, integrity, and the willingness to do what's right even when it's hard. That's the kind of leadership this company needs." After he hung up, I sat at my desk, the corner office with the view of the entire city, and thought about the journey from conference room C to here, about the price that had been paid, by me and by others, about Mark in a halfway house somewhere, trying to rebuild a life from rubble, about Elena and the kids, thriving in ways we hadn't when I was working 80-hour weeks to prove myself to someone who'd never valued what I brought, about the quiet power of choosing truth when lies would be easier, about the long-term rewards of integrity when shortcuts seem smarter, about the particular strength required to stand firm when everyone around you is asking you to bend. My boss didn't know the CEO, and I had been working together for years. He didn't know that competence creates its own protection. He didn't know that the person he was trying to replace cheaply was irreplaceable. He learned. They all learned. And I learned too, that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you becomes the best thing that ever happened, if you're willing to stand in the fire and come out forged instead of burned. The rain that had started this story had long since stopped. Now there was only sunshine and work and a future built on foundations that wouldn't crumble. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.